Okay, everyone, we'll get started. So our first talk is with Abuna Anthony Paul. It's titled The Suffering Servant. So in this session, Abuna Anthony will explore how suffering is an essential part of servanthood, as exemplified by Christ. He will guide us through Isaiah 53 and Philippians 3:10, reflecting on how our suffering, when united with Christ, can bring life and healing to others, and how can we offer healing to others through our redeeming suffering. So please join me in welcoming Abuna Anthony Paul.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. I'm a little bit rusty, so bear with me. I haven't done this in almost a year, so this whole last few days is weird for me. I'm learning how to suffer. Not doing the talks to suffer. I'm going to stop before I mess up. Each one of the talks, I'm really bad at talks and how to organize them and stuff like that, so just pretend that they make sense. But the talks, I hope, get progressively maybe more practical, but the first one is intentionally, just like if you want to nap, you're fine, but is intentionally a little bit more theoretical at first, just because it's like, you can't do practical without theory. And so it's to understand that concept first, because just giving people random tips without understanding health, you're not going to know how to put it together. So the first talk, and I'm going to try and zip through things to make time for questions, because I learned my lesson last time, and John will cut me off. Shadi will cut me off. But each one of them could be their own series. So I'm just giving maybe high level, and then that's something that maybe you guys could go deeper in on your own or with your spiritual fathers or as. The first one, the suffering servant, where we have this image of the wounded healer in Christ, is a very meaningful one, and I actually think it's become a problem. I think we don't like suffering anymore. The previous generations, we used to criticize them as basically being masochists, but now we've swung to this other extreme, where the world is completely anti-suffering, right? There's whatever is your inconvenience, it's let's fix it for you, right? You're tired, we'll give you this magic pill, right? You're obese, we'll give you these pills. I'm not saying those things are bad, right? I'm just saying is that we want to eliminate work, right? You want to, even I saw on Amazon, this machine you can put on your abs to just stimulate it. So it's you don't even have to do the crunches, it'll do it for you. Where I'm really? Thank you, I thought it was funny too. But there's a fundamental necessity to suffering. And actually I feel weird saying that, because theoretically there's not a necessity to suffer. Practically there is a necessity to suffer. God didn't want us to suffer, but we do suffer, and it's inevitable. So I'm going to do background and then get into the servant part, and then the second two talks might be more on the scenarios and the servants and stuff like that. And maybe to the question that the gentleman who's here had before, I want to start first to just saying suffering, whether you want to call that holy evil or whatever it is, but evil just being something not good or pleasant, right, is a product, as when Cyril was talking about, of free will, right? And so everyone talked to this problem of evil, and it's in philosophy courses, if God is so good and he's omnipotent, et cetera, then why does evil happen? I'm not that interested right now in that issue. What I do want to say from it is that in the story of creation, we were given dominion in two ways that matter for this conversation, right? One is that he gave man the whole planet, right? Is that he said that they will submit to you, that we've given these animals your subjection. That's why Adam names them, right? And he's saying, I've given you authority, dominion is the word used, over the whole entire world. So there's this authority given over material world other than ourselves. And then on top of it, Christ said, or God said, that we were made in his image and likeness, which we talk about a lot. But part of this is autonomy, right? So one of the attributes of God is his ability to have autonomy, to make decisions. So he didn't hold that back when he made us, right? He could have, as the Father is saying, he could have taken that away, but he gave it to us. So the result is I have authority over me, right? I have authority over how I act, and I have authority over the earth. why do I care to even say that? Is that I'm saying that any evil or suffering that you can imagine is always going to come back to choices made, even if it's not your own, right? Even if it's not even in your own generation. But everything is going to come back to choices that people made, whether choice about the earth, whether choice about themselves, whether it was social choices, whether it was governmental choices, but they are always going to come back to choices, right? And if we don't click like that, our whole narrative of suffering is going to be confused, right? Because then we'll say things like, why did God do that? Where often when people say, why did God do that? My internal reaction, if not external, is usually, why do you assume that he did do that? Right? What if it wasn't him at all? Right? Did he tell you to do that? Right? Of being like, why did God bring me to such and such city? And I'm like, did he? Like, or did you choose to go to that city? And I'm not even being sarcastic. Like, what made you believe that that was a divine calling that God said to go there? Because if it wasn't, then why are you upset about a choice you made? Right? So yes, you're suffering now, and we'll get into that, but and meaningful versus non-meaningful suffering, but why did you assume that it was God, right? Because there is going to be a problem if you think you're suffering as this victim of this so-called good God, right? When it isn't that, and we say outrageous stuff. I mean, it's Saint Abuna Bishoy Kamala's feast was the other day, and because of his narrative about cancer, for example. I grew up thinking that Abuna Bishoy asked for cancer. I was told that, right? And I was just like, what? Why? And then I was with one of the Alexandrian priests, Abuna Yohanna in Chicago, and so he's showing me of chemo, like Abuna in chemo, and I was like, I was told he refused treatment because he wanted this. And they're like, no, he did chemo. And I was okay, thank you, because I was worked up. I'm just like, because people would say like, oh, you should desire this disease. This is the heavenly disease. And I'm like, who asks for that? Like what is the narrative here? Or even I've had my own battle with illness where people would say things like, you know, you're suffering because he loves you. And I'm in my head, I'm like, I hope he loves you more. But like, what is this narrative that we're saying? Give you a great big hug. But freedom is the cause of all of our suffering, but it is also the cause of joy. That's something like, it's not a bad gift. It's just that there is going to be a consequence to our choice, and anything negative that you can imagine is always going to be a consequence of choice. If we pollute the earth and we get acid rain, and the acid rain breaks down a forest, that's not that God wanted to break down a forest. That's that humans did something wrong, right? If we're doing all this radiation stuff, we have no idea yet what our cell phones are doing. We'll find out soon. And I get cancer because of blah, blah, blah. That isn't God, and now he's throwing all this stuff out. So choice is a big thing. So everything that hurts is a consequence of freedom, okay? So today's focus for me is not our responsibilities toward this or our accountability about evil, as much as just to look at the servant side of things or a Christian side of things about the suffering. So Christ himself took suffering, right? And its temporal meaning, like temporal meaning within time and the stuff that we don't like, the inconvenience of it, the pain of it, and ended up giving light through it. And that's why we say through his wounds, we are healed. So there's something about how Christ submitted, used his own autonomy, his own will, of saying, I will subject myself to you at whatever cost, right? And so because of this voluntary aspect of it, right, the intentional, willful accepting of a suffering, it became life-giving. And we proclaim this as glory, right? That's why we even say, Holy God, holy, mighty, holy, immortal, who in weakness showed what is greater than might, right? Because if it was, the awfulness of it that he was humiliated, and it's humiliating to be on the cross, like, if that was supposed to be all that there was, then there's nothing life-giving about that. It was his acceptance of it that he was able to work through it, and from it, give life, right? And that's why if we participate in his crucifixion, we participate in his resurrection. But the only true healer is the triune God. So the only way that we're going to have access to healing is from our uniting to him, right? None of us are going to be the source of healing, right? That's not where it comes from. So if we choose in our suffering to become a vessel of healing, if I say I'm choosing to be united to you, then I can be a healer by cooperating with God, right? Even in my wounds. There's a beautiful book by Henri Nouwen called Wounded Healer. I strongly recommend it. Just meditations on this concept of being a wounded healer. And when we say wounded healer, the idea here is not saying that your wound itself is the beauty or the healing thing. So we're not saying, oh, we're going to use your cancer to heal diabetes. That's not like what we're trying to say. We're changing the direction or the goal, the telos, the aim of the suffering, and that in doing that, your suffering can become a source of life for you and for others, right? And that's why all of this is going to also come back to choice, right? You have choice about how to deal with suffering and how to view your suffering. So first part is purposeful suffering. Again, I'm trying to go fast so that there's time for questions at the end. Right, Shadi? So I can start with general advice and concepts of how to work with suffering and then open up. But number one is make your suffering, if you want it to be life-giving, make your suffering intentional, right? Let your suffering be a participation in his suffering or directed at him, okay? So a mindset here is, here's a quote from the best saint, Saint Anthony, if you didn't know that was the best saint, where he says, the greatest might, not the greatest weakness, the greatest strength, the greatest might of a man is to bring upon his soul his transgression at all times before God and to expect temptations to the end, to expect trials until the end. Why am I bothering to say that with suffering? Is to say, if you have that mindset, you're not going to have dramatic reactions to the concept of suffering because you already know it's going to come. To me, it's the mindset of saying, I work in a body shop. I'm aware I'm highly likely to get injured, right? That if I'm working in an infectious disease lab, I'm at a higher risk than others to get an infection. That's going to happen because I'm in contact. It's just saying be logical about it. In that space, things are going to happen. We're dealing with people's will all the time. It's going to happen. You're going to have trials. You're going to have suffering. Because if your mindset is, I don't understand, I did all the right things, I don't get why I'm suffering, then if you're saying that, then you don't get it, right? And we all say that, right? But if I'm saying that it doesn't, then you don't realize that there's this whole thing going on at all times, right? That you have to think about. So in doing that, then you can say that I want to willfully make the suffering have meaning. Because now you won't be stuck in the mindset of, why is this happening? Or being like, why is it happening? Because of someone's free will. Right? Whether my own, whether someone else's, the why is going to be that. Short of when God has actively caused something to happen, in which he tells you, right? But then you'll have your own kind of peace because you'll at least like, okay, at least I know why, right? So I'm eliminating that one from the arm of just saying that one's easier, right? But if I have that mindset of being like, okay, it's going to happen regardless, then the question becomes, how do I make it meaningful? So one way is to say, how about if my goal is actually the kingdom, if my goal is my unity with God in all things, then your suffering can become a means of virtue, right? Abba Shishoy, a lesser saint than St. Anthony, but a disciple of St. Anthony, he said, if anything good happens to us, it is God's providence. If anything bad, it is because of our sins, right? People don't like that language anymore because it sounds all negative, but it's not, right? And the reason why what he's saying, and it's people like, oh, that's a cop-out. Of course you're calling it good because God did it. And then when it sucks, you like blame me. And I'm like, yes, I do. Because the design is good. If we used our choice according to design, then yes, it would be good. So when we're saying all good comes from God, it's just the truth of saying, yeah, the design was good. Whenever we actually follow it, things go really well. Right? When we choose not to, i.e. sin, aka sin, right, or going against the design, yes, things suck, right? And that's where we affect each other. When somebody decides to be ridiculously selfish, you get angry, right? Or someone else becomes selfish, right? If somebody cusses you out, you get upset, right? Whereas if we didn't do those things, we would all be quite happy, right? Things would be peaceful. So if I can view it that way of just being like, okay, if I take that quote from Abba Shishoy, of saying, hey, what did I do wrong in some way to cause this? And then how do I grow from it? Right? It doesn't need to be dramatic. Or just being like, oh, I talked too much, and now people are talking about me. I gave them that data by being nonstop, right? Or like, I thought it was okay that because I didn't sleep well, that it's okay to be Mr. Grinch with everybody. And I'm like, why are they jerks to me? It's like, because you're a jerk. And I'm not saying this is always the answer, I'm saying, but it can be, right? And so if I take it and look at it like, what is the thing that I'm doing that has caused my suffering, then suddenly my suffering is very valuable because it's helped me actually grow, right? Now I can actually be like, oh, I didn't realize that I had this vice. I saw it in everybody else because I love to judge, but I did not know that I had it, right? And so when I become alert to it, if I have that kind of saying in mind, I can now use that as a way to be like, it doesn't matter. I did suffer because of the sin, but it was a great suffering because now I don't have that issue. I learned that this symptom that I had a root cause of this disease, and because of the suffering of the symptoms, I can get treatment, right? And so suddenly it can become great, and like I can now have health again because of my experience of suffering, right? This is why the body has like a pain alert, right? Your peripheral nervous system doesn't wait for your brain to think of the pain. It's just like, oh, pain indicates something wrong, right? Remove your it's a warning system, right? That there's something wrong. It can also become a means of your spiritual training. Because if you take it further than just, what did I do wrong? And ask the question of, okay, now that I'm aware of that, where am I weak? Right? Whereas, like, where you can become even proactive about it. I remember having a conversation with Abuna Lazarus in Egypt once in like early university days. Just the quote always stuck with me, and so I use it a lot. Where he was like, hey, like, no one wants to fast, right? And he wasn't saying that as a lament of this generation. He meant it like exactly the way it sounds. He was like, no one likes to fast. Why would anybody want to fast, right? Nobody wants to do all of these things or to train virtues, like, because it's difficult. But he was just like, but, right? He's like, if you want to win these prizes, the race that Abuna was talking about, and that's actually what he said. He was like, then we have to. It's not about whether I like to or not. It's find out where I'm weak and I need to train. We must do these things if we want to win that race, if we want to get anywhere. He said to be athlete of God, to train, to put oneself in a harness, is his exact words. Discipline is required to win the prize, right? So I can use that suffering to be a form of discipline, of being like, I've now become aware of not just that I'm a cause of it, but of a point to have training. So it can be like, okay, I discovered that my ego was at fault. Great, that's a great discovery. But then the next part is to say, now how do I train? How do I learn to restrain my ego, right? How do I stop it from acting up? How do I become less accustomed to pleasure? If my issue that I discovered was, oh, I just don't like to have any inconvenience, right? That I just want this, then that can become, how do I train in that? How do I care less about how people view me? Right? Of being like, oh, the cause of my suffering is that I'm obsessed with how people see me. So I put on this show, right? And now I'm having all these issues that come up. And it's like, well, why do I want that so badly? And then what do I do? And I'm like, and suddenly you can actually start to grow. Okay. I'm usually mumbling. I'm trying to be loud this time. Okay. Now I'm eating the mic. So we said virtue training, but then knowledge. And this part I think is really cool, right? Like, but I'm a geek, but you can learn the different shades of different vices and virtues by your suffering, right? I'm going to overdo GI stuff because I've had a great year in GI with surgeries and stuff, and so it's going to be very egocentric. But like as a pharmacist, I cared a lot about GI just from like pathways and how medicines work, but I actually didn't know that much about motility. I didn't know that much about wounds, right? So in not knowing, when I had a gaping hole and I'm like, and nothing first was coming out and then too much is coming out, and then I've got like wounds and scars, it's stuff I didn't know about. So as a result, I would have anxiety at first, being like, is this supposed to happen? Like, because I don't know. And I'm like, it stopped. Is it supposed to stop? Right? And the surgeon's like, yeah, relax, that part's normal. Versus I'm like, that's not normal. I'm like, how did you know? Right? Or with the wound where I'm like, they're like, oh, this wound is looking good. I'm like, I think it looks disgusting. And they're like, oh, this is healing nicely. I'm like, it's oozing blood nonstop. I'm like, yeah, that's good, right? I didn't know that, right? And so I got to see the different phases of wound healing, right? Of being like, oh, that's gross, but it's kind of neat, right? And so in these diseases that we have in our suffering, it's like you can now learn the different shades of vice and virtue, of being like, oh, I thought I was less jealous. I wasn't, right? Or like my anger has changed, or my lying has changed. I was originally lying for like self-gain. Now I lie all the time. Now I only lie to one person, right? What's underneath that? What are the shades of that that are causing that? Like, and then suddenly it becomes more interesting, because then you have much more like individualized therapy, if you will, right? Because you now know what these specific things are, and that knowledge is huge, right? And we'll get to the service part, but I'm like, I don't want to focus on the service part first, because this needs to penetrate us, is be like, in seeing it, you can understand what might be happening in a group scale, and so you're calm about it, being like, oh, there's an infection going around, right? And you can calm down instead of, for example, getting worked up by it and flaring it even more. And the result of you not knowing, right, is that you might then finally pursue discipleship, right? That when you start saying, I now know that I have this issue, this is what's going on, but I don't get it, I don't even know how to fix it, then you suddenly have the nucleus of what you need to go ask about, right? Then it won't just be like, hey, I did this wrong. Okay, cool, Allah halak, right? God absolve you. And it's like, but how do I fix this? How do I get treated? Now there's discipleship. Then maybe you'll be like, you know what, people find spiritual reading boring, and it's like, okay, but now I'm gonna read about something that affects me, it's personal. How do I stop this? Or how do I learn more about this, right? It might be which sermons I'm now gonna listen to. I hope it would be with your spiritual father, thinking, being like, okay, how do I train on this? And then suddenly you might actually be excited because you're learning more, right? And then you might actually start seeing effects, and might get you excited about other things. And often when you're treating one symptom, you're often treating multiple things at once, not even realizing it. And then suddenly what was theory to you is no longer theory, right? Then suddenly it becomes a living thing where you're like, yeah, I know that, right? I now know a whole ton of stuff about me from my bad, right? Where I'm like, oh, I don't do well in this environment because I'm really weak here, here, and here. So I'm like, okay, I'm being sent back into that. I'm running to my father confession, being like, I need like muscle workouts to work out that muscle group, because in my normal environment, I don't have to deal with that. But over there I do, right? Where there I'm gonna be challenged more, right? And this is the benefit of community. I always tell the story of like, when I was a novice at the monastery, I was at the time confessing with His Eminence, and I came to him and I was like, there's this monk that was testing. So he cussed me out without using cuss words, but he monastically cussed me out. And so I was sitting with Sayyidina in confession, and I'm like, okay, I didn't tell him who. I'm like, a monk cussed me out. And I go, and Sayyidina, I said all the right things. I did all the monastic things. I like beat my breast, akhtit, sabuna, I've sinned, and all that stuff. And I was like, but I was definitely cussing him out in my head. Like, where I was just like, you're not even a monk. And who do you think you are to test? And Sayyidina was like, excellent. And I was like, I didn't think it was that good. But he was like, no, because when you're in your cell, when you're in your room, right, no one disturbs you. Of course, you didn't know that you have no patience. You thought you did, but you don't, right? You thought you're long-suffering. You're not. And it was only when this interaction happened that it came out, right? So then I was like, oh, okay, cool. So yes, I'm like, it made me aware even now, but now I was thinking about different shades. Now it's new shades, right? Now it's just like, I might be selfish in all my time in my cell, but I also might need to, like, it's changed my approach to my cell, right? When do I need to go? When do I not go in? And then there's these new discussions I'm having, right, about that kind of thing. So knowledge and then experience, right? In working for victory, you get to see what goes into it, right? By struggling through the process, you learn the process, right? Like it's one thing to just talk about process, but only by actually going through it, then you learn it. And God comes near to those who are suffering. Like that's why there's these new experiences that you might have, right? Is that this is one thing near and dear to God's heart, because He shows solidarity with the person suffering because He did, right? And so He speaks often about the victims, about the unjust, about the oppression, about all these things. So if I'm going through suffering that has nothing to do with me, God is near, and that feeling is beautiful, right? When the greatest Saint Anthony was literally beat up by the devil, right? The result of him, after he was struggling, was Christ himself appearing to him, right? And Christ himself healing him, and Christ himself saying, way to go, good job. I can't imagine how good that felt, right? When I was in the hospital, when my Metropolitan flew all the way from California to spend 3 hours just to see how I was doing, right? What a beautiful experience, right? I'm trying to say is that feeling of love, that is a result of suffering, right? Was like, who am I that you just did that? You're literally going to turn around and take a 6-hour flight back, right? It was not on your way, right? That experience suddenly becomes a big a source of strength to you, right? That suddenly your misery of your suffering has a beauty to it that you actually like, where you can be like, yeah, it sucked, but Christ appeared. It was crazy, right? And so then these people are like, oh wow, okay, I'm gonna take courage from that. I'm gonna struggle too, because I would love to have had that experience, right? There's beautiful things that come out of it. And because of that experience, it will help us understand other people, right? I remember a specific moment during when I was in the hospital where just my brain was gone and things sucked, with infections, but it was no one could get it. They can't. Everyone was very, very nice, but what's going on is there. And before I had gone off for what was supposed to be a simple surgery, there was this person in the area that I was serving in that I wanted to do a tough love thing with, right? Where I had been preparing for it, and I'm not usually I'm usually the friendly guy, but I was no, I'm ready to kick his butt. And I had all these things in my mind that I was ready to say, and I kept delaying sending it, right? Because I was I want to be nearby and not on a trip for when he replies, because I don't want to just punch him out and not be there. And so thankfully it got delayed, because in my own experience, I was you felt like you're in the dark, right? And so I want to tell this person of you need to do this, and if you just self-pity yourself, this is what's going to happen, yada, yada. And I'm it clicked for me. I'm oh, some people need tough love, but this guy definitely didn't. Right? I'm this is somebody who's walking in the dark, who everyone is yelling at him for being in the dark. And everyone's telling him stories about what it's like to be in the light. And a bunch of people are saying you wouldn't be in the dark if you didn't blah, 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 blah. And so he's been trying to get out of the dark for years and hasn't been able to. And it's just listen, if you're not going to either walk me into the light, then stop talking, right? And either just be with me and shut up about the light, right? Or actually take me to the light. Where I'm that experience became real to me, right? Being no, you all think you're going to heal it, you're not, right? You all think you get it, you clearly don't. Everyone got excited about the different things they're going to do, none of them worked, right? And so that experience of going through that, right, made it be no, that person isn't just self-pitying. There might be some self-pity there too, right? That might need to get treated. But now I can understand it, so that now I'm not the taunt being God loves you so much and that's why you have cancer, right? Of being wow, right? But the person's experience would be might know that even if they see some truth in that of I might not say that to this person, but there's a difference in it, right? Now when I go to someone's hospital room, I'm you need a tablet, you need to hack into your TV so that you can stream. You need to do there's this solidarity thing that's happened, right? By going through it. This is Abba John the Short. There's a famous story that we don't tell these stories anymore. There's this famous story where St. John the Short, who's a great guy but not as great as St. Anthony, where he was excited, he goes to his Abba and he's like, I prayed that I have no temptation and the Lord heard me. And he was so excited. It's great, I have such a happy life. And he was whoa, quickly go pray for it back. Right? And he's what? And he's go pray for it back. And he was you won't enter the kingdom without this, right? And so he went back and he's okay, Lord, I don't ask you to take it away, but at least give me the grace, give me the strength that I need to get through it. If you don't know what it's like to struggle at work, how do you help someone struggling at work? If you've never struggled with how to pray, right, with how boring you find it, or how your mind wanders, or I don't have the time for it, how on earth can you meaningfully help somebody who's telling you that? Are you just going to throw theory at them as well, right? Are we going to all get sick because no one actually knows how to heal, right? It's by going through the symptomology that we can discover how to deal with the disease, right? That's how we get there. If you've never struggled in your marriage, if you've never struggled with addiction, then don't talk to people, right? We want monks, for example, to work before they enter, right? Like of not just entering right out the gates, and I would hope for priesthood too, is because there's something that happens by your struggles that you gain experience, and in your experience you can now actually connect and relate and advise properly, right? Imagine telling somebody who's just had a baby of being like, and she's like, I don't have time, I'm so tired, and I'm like, you have all the time in the world. I don't understand why you're not praying the whole Beya. Right? Of being like, look at your hours, look at the math. Your kid sleeps every 2 hours and you wake them up to feed. You have 2 whole hours, right? You could yell at someone, say that, and they'll probably cuss you out, right? Because you have no idea, right? If you don't go through it or see someone go through it or have some experience of it, you're meaningless, right? That suffering becomes so useless. But it also does something cool, which is camaraderie, right? Like when there's a sense of we're all battling together, right, is that suddenly I can love my general, Christ, who suffered for us and that I'm following towards the cross. He's not, you guys go fight, I'm going to go watch from over here, right? He's joined in and is the leader. But even with my fellow soldiers. But first towards our general, saying, it makes me want to seek him out, seek his attention, seek his face, seek his words, seek his comfort, seek his instruction, right? Of being like, I want that. Right? When I have that feeling of suffering, then we know it. War is not fun, and it does. I don't know if any of you guys have watched, I don't remember what it's called. There's that Netflix World War II series from like 10 years ago. Everyone loved it. That sense of their Band of Brothers, I think it was called. But the camaraderie in the trenches, right, was something so beautiful. It was something that surpasses any experience of a lifetime, even though it sucked. It was awful. You could die any day, and they did, right? You don't have access to good food, but the unity in that suffering for that real goal brought them together. It made it life-giving, right? Versus like, yeah, you go fight over there, you might get shot. I'm over here, oh, too bad he died, right? That's not the mood in war. It's like, oh no, right? And then it's like, at all costs, what do we do? How do we protect each other? But you'll only have that if you think the battle is worth fighting for, right? That's like you have to have that aim, that telos, and that understanding. And if you ask for your suffering to be healing to others, then your service can be effective. And I mean this in so many ways, and I'm only doing a high level because of time. But for example, let's say you're suffering because someone's angry at you and wrongfully. If you say, Lord, let this person be angry at me, just intentionally, it's about choice. That's what he said. All of this comes down to choice. It's not about whether it's really what it means. Lord, how about let this person be angry at me because they already are, rather than at someone else. Right? I could fight off this thing, this uncomfortable suffering that's been about me. Like, do you even know that I had nothing to do with it? It was actually so-and-so's fault, right? It's like, well, why not accept the suffering willfully and say, better that I suffer, I can handle it, I know the truth, right? Then expose this other person and cause them to stumble or fall. Why do I need to expose? Why can't my suffering suddenly become life-giving by how I choose to use it, right? Then it's purposeful. 5 minutes? Oh, dang. Before questions or before done? Okay. Got it. Covering someone, instead of exposing, is to take it on myself, right? So that the other person, sorry, my brain is gone, isn't. I thought we had 20 minutes, so I'm going to be on hypersonic speed. Or how about my suffering because of unity or reconciliation for others? It's okay that I'm the bad guy. Others are reconciled. Of saying, you know what, for the sake of the service, for the sake of the peace of the service, let me accept the suffering of not getting my way, right? Of saying, let me accept the suffering of letting people think badly of me to prevent someone else who can't handle that from having to go through it. All of these active choices suddenly make your suffering mean something, right? There's a story that I heard as a kid that I've never forgotten. I don't know if it's Coptic urban legend, but I love it. Of this kid who went into his father's confession, and he started suddenly confessing out of nowhere, like hardcore stuff that he's never done in his life, where he's suddenly a drug addict and doing all sorts of random stuff, and the priest is like, who are you? Like, what is going on? And so he was like, okay, here are your spiritual exercises, and you're gonna do these matanyas, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out, as it happened, like he found out way later, the kid was confessing someone else's sins. That's how badly he felt for this other person. He's saying, how about I take on this whole thing, and if that saves my brother, then I'll do it. I'll take it on for it. So I will zip through needless suffering just as a concept. Your suffering is not meaningful, forgive me, when you're at fault, right? It can become meaningful how you direct it. I'm just saying, but your suffering itself, if it's because you did something messed up, don't be like, woe is me, how could this happen? It's like, no, you did something. Or when you're seeking sin, where it's like, I don't know I have AIDS, I've been sleeping with everybody, right? I'm doing hyperbole for the sake of time. It's like, no, that's not because someone did something to you, right? If it's because of your ambition, right? Where like you have ambition in the service, so you've poisoned the service, and now you're suffering because nobody likes you, because you put your own personal agenda above the goals and the aims of the service. If it's, I remember an example of a servant who went on strike to prove a point. And I'm like, you completely defeated, and it was a very like public servant, right? And it's like, now everyone's talking about it. And now people are taking sides, and now people feel alienated because, and you're like, I'm suffering, I hate this, I'm not even happy for the church, and I don't sleep at night. And I'm like, yeah, you're causing it. This is not a purposeful suffering, right? Or for fake virtue, where you're like, no, I'm withdrawing, and I'm keeping my silence, when really it's because you are so angry at everybody, and so you have this negativity about him, like that you're suffering by being isolated because you chose to be isolated, not because it was actually the virtuous thing to do, right? Something that is needless suffering. Or you're suffering because you did wrong in the name of service. I'm like, I was showing solidarity with you, so I went to the shisha bar with them. Yes, I smoked with them, and yes, I was cussing my life out. But it was because Paul said, be all things to all men. And it's like, and now they don't trust me. I am such a victim. I'm like, no, you're not a victim, right? So I mean, like, you caused it. Last line. So all I would say to end it there, I'm sorry for high speeding there, is to say, the reason why I didn't want to spend as much time here on the servants, on the practical application, is to say, if the concept of suffering does not become real to you as you, not just in the name of service, then you're not going to have the growth. It's only when you yourself understand it, if you internalize it and learn from the experience of suffering, then your lessons will be real. Even purposeless suffering could become purposeful if you learn from it and said, I realized that I caused unnecessary suffering, and now I've learned from it. Even now, suddenly, even that becomes life-giving to you. And when it becomes life-giving to you, you'll be able to use it to heal others as our Lord did. Glory be to God forever. Amen. With 1 minute under. Okay. So we're switching it up a bit. Now we're doing the healing servant. This was the focus around the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bind up the brokenhearted, this concept of being a vessel of healing to other people. But like we said in the first talk, the meaningfulness or the healing can only come by my unity with God. Like, I'm not going to be... Can't do it. I feel like I'm supposed to move. The healer. I can be used to heal. I can be a vessel of healing. I can have the gift of healing, but the source of healing isn't me. And that has to be understood. So if we're understanding it to be our unity with Christ, then you can't be a good healer if you don't know anything about Christ. It's that simple. And that's why I'm like, I know I take shots on it regularly with the WWJD bracelets, where like I sincerely, I'm always asking, but do you know the answer to that question? When we say that, do we know it's a great question, but do you know what he would do? And I don't know that we do. So it starts off with Christ. We have to know who Christ is, how he speaks, and to not presume, and this will be a big part of talk number 3, don't presume that you know what is Christ like, right? Whatever it is that you think you know would be, this is what Christ would do, don't assume yourself to be true. Ask yourself, where did you get that from? Why do you think that? Is that based on something real, or is that just how you've been interpreting your whole life and not actually looked at the facts? So in other words, to be a disciple of health is the only way to understand health, right? You can't just start saying, I'll tell you what's healthy. How on earth do you know what's healthy? Right? If you haven't studied health, you have no way of telling people whether it was healthy or not healthy. Let alone, like we said, to talk to others about their health. So I'm going to look at some of the different ways that Christ healed. I was saying these are the ways that servants and any Christian really can be healing. The first is healing presence. And I'm going to, again, speed through. Do I still have 45? I know we're running a little bit late. Just so I'm aware. Okay. So we brought up some of this yesterday in the outreach talk, but Christ healed Zacchaeus just by being present, right? That's like sometimes it's not the show in the works. He literally said, "I'm going to come over to your house," right? And he didn't give him a sermon. He didn't tell him much, right? This was someone who was simply seeking, and the presence of Christ was enough to heal him. That he knew he had a problem with greed, avarice, like that kind of stuff. The presence of Christ, he just voluntarily, by seeing Christ, was like, "I know I have this problem. I'm going to fix it." He didn't say, "My problem is that I'm a tax collector." Right? He didn't say, "I will no longer be a tax collector." He actually said, "I've been robbing people, and I'm going to give back the money, right? And I'm going to restore anybody that I took advantage of." Or, for example, like St. Anthony, the best saints healing, Christ appeared, but he didn't say, "I pronounce you healed," right? Sometimes it's actually just that he was physically there, right? Can be a source of healing. And so sometimes what's needed from us is to just be there, right? We tend to like the dramatic, right? Do I have the right words? Did I say all these things? Did I make them cry? And we apparently really love to cry these days. Like, no, we had a really good emotional moment, and I was so convicted. And it's like, it doesn't need to look like that all the time. It can look like that. It just doesn't need to look like that. And that sometimes it's just that stability of being around wholesomeness, right, is something that can do something. So ask yourself in your service, are you present regularly to people? Are you there for people? Because if so, that can be healing. When there's those people that are just stable, right? Those people go a long way. You can probably think of people at your own church that just, over the decades, are just there, right? That they do something, there's this sense of stability. I know, like, for me, when Uncle Nabi Hanton from Kitchener passed away, I felt like I lost something big. And it's not like we ever had hardcore conversations, right? But there was this sense of, like, that guy's presence does something to me. It grounds me. He's my sense of church, right? So there's something to coming through. Healing words. I'm going to talk about it, but I don't like it being the main one just because I feel like ministry has become mostly words now, where all we do is talk. I love the mic. We talk a lot. And so there's a million sermons, there's a million meetings, there's a million funky posters that are so splashy and look really nice where, like, you think you're going to, like, the convention center. Cool, I'm not anti-words, but it's just like this, it's not the only one, and we do it a lot. But I'm going to maybe emphasize some other things. Our Lord gave parables. So in our healing, I'm like, try and speak where possible as servants with analogies where you can. It helps people get it, right? That's why even if you were to study the cultural context of our Lord, the parables he was using were very relatable, right? They weren't out there. So like something as simple as like the parable of the seeds, like food was the most limited resource for them back there, right? So when he's like, a sower went to sow, and he had this many seeds, and he threw some on the rocks, his listeners would have been like, why is he doing that? That's crazy. This is such a limited resource. Why are you throwing it on the ground? Of course it's not going to grow, right? So when at the end of it, it's like you get 10, like 100 folds, they're like, whoa, he got what he's supposed to get and more, right? It was something that they could relate to and understand. This is so awkward. I get it. I'm sorry. Sorry to people at the back. But parables, analogies, like, use your words effectively, right? Think about those things, because then people can really, I get excited when someone gives a good analogy. Like for me, I'm like, oh, okay. Like even sometimes I'm doing marriage counseling, for example, I'll make both people in the couple use the analogy so that they can understand each other. I'm like, no. Explain yourself using that same analogy. I'm like, no. So in that story you're telling, I actually think it looks like this, right? And then suddenly they're like, oh, I thought you were arguing about this. And it's like, no, that annoys me too, but I'm actually really mad about this, right? And then suddenly it goes somewhere, right? As opposed to just being like, he'll never change, she'll never change. Like, it does something. But in order to do analogy, you have to understand the concept, right? If you don't know the content to dumb down, then you're just dumb. Forgive me. But if you get it, you can simplify it. Otherwise, what you said just has no depth, right? So you need to understand to do it, and that can help. And that's why the words worked with them for those whom it pierced, right? Is that it was something that could enter, that was fathomable, that they could actually do something with. So the Lord did also preach. I'm not anti-preaching. I'm clearly at a spiritual day right now, but just saying not all the time. Right? Given that the Lord's ministry may have been as long as 3.5 years, the amount of text that we have of those 3.5 years is actually very little, right? If you think about it. Like, you've got 4 Gospels with a whole lot of overlap, right? There's not a lot that's there. So talking is good, it has a role, but it's not the only way. So here's a story from the best Saint Anthony, where it says some brethren came to Abba Antony, and they said, Abba Antony, give us a word whereby we may live. Abba, give me a word. And the elder said to them, you have the scriptures. They should be enough, right? He doesn't want to do it. And they say, yeah, we have the scriptures, but we also want to hear you. And so he says, all right. So he uses the gospel to preach, which we don't like. And he says, all right, well, the gospel says if a man hits you on the one cheek, turn the other. And they said, we can't do this. Abba Antony said to them, if you can't turn the other cheek, at least let him keep hitting you on the same one. And they said to him, we can't do that either. And the old man said, if you can't do this, just don't hit them back. And they said, we can't even do this. And he said, make them some stew, for they are ill. And then he said, if you can't do this, you're unable to do the other things, prayers are necessary forthwith. Right? So he's saying, you have the knowledge, you're asking for a word, you're reading the gospel, and you can say all the things that you want, and you're trying to have a deep religious conversation, but you don't know how to turn the other cheek. Right? So it's like, it's to keep that in context. That is like, if you're not a living gospel, then your words might not hit home. That they will be less healing, right? All of us, when we're like everyone mocks hypocrisy, right? If they're like, oh, you should never like judge people, and then meanwhile at the servant meeting, all we're doing is judging, right? Then give all the talks you want, right? But it's become useless. And yet the same Abba Antony the Greatest also taught from Scripture and had many sayings. It's not like he didn't talk. He did talk, right? But it's about knowing the when and the why. Because sometimes our Lord healed by speaking alone. So I'm acknowledging that happened. But it was often accompanied with other things, right? The Samaritan woman was healed using speech, but it was also about his positioning, right? It was about him being there, about his empathy, about his understanding of her, right? It wasn't just words. It wasn't like, oh, as long as I tell her I have living water, right? Like if that was the goal, right? That wouldn't have done it, being like, no, listen, lady, I have living water, right? And she's like, if I don't see a physical stream, I don't get it. And then he's like, but I told you. That doesn't do it, right? There was something way more to it that healed than just the words, right? That wasn't it alone. Whereas with the healing of the centurion's son, it was just by speech. I think there's different ways that he heals using speech. With the centurion's son, he's just like, because of your faith, I'm telling you, he's already okay. And that was enough. The person was there. And this can be real in us as servants. Like, I'm not bringing it up just as random, right? There are people, some of you may have met, some of you might not have had that opportunity yet. I've met people where sometimes there's specific people that are very few in my life. If they said it, I feel secure. Like when that person says, don't worry, it's going to be okay, for some reason I actually find peace when that person says it. Whereas I don't from anybody else. And I'm just like, because there's something very alive and real in them. Right, where I trust that there's some sanctity in them that I haven't understood or grasped or reached, but when they say it, I'm like, no, it's real, and like I feel at peace. Right, you can be that to someone if what you are living is real. Right, like it's not just us finding it from someone else. Same thing with the paralytic. That I don't really like him, but he was healed by speech. It was like, get up, take your bed, and go. But my point is that there were words. But it wasn't about the words, especially in our context, because all we do is talk, right? It was about the heart, the mindset, the way of being, seeing, understanding that he was healing, and using words in those healings. because excessive speech is usually a problem. And it can lead to your own illnesses, let alone become a source of illnesses for others, right? People who just talk all the time are much more likely to say something wrong and do something wrong and cause wrong effects. One of the famous early church fathers who remain nameless, they call him the father of repentance and the father of all heresy. He was not a heretic, but he wrote so much that his writings were so like voluminous that people used it in so many wrong ways, and it's just like, and then he, even before he died, he had a whole set of volumes just called retractions. I was saying, I said this, but I meant this. This was just a mess, like that. Like, be careful. Like, don't talk nonstop. And you're talking nonstop is going to cause conflict in service, probably, right? Then you might start feeling like you own people, because it's like, no, I told them. And when you start saying language like that, where it's like, who do you think you are? Like, who cares that you told them? They don't owe you anything. Like, we've got to be careful with speech, and sometimes your speech can hurt. This story, I think it's from Adminia from the Desert Fathers, that I found that I liked, where it says on one occasion, this monk was visiting the ancient name Oxyrhynchus, and there was this monk that used to make great alms and oblations. He was famous for his charity. And so a widow came to him, and he had this practice of anybody who came to him, he would give them some stuff for free. So the widow comes to him, and she says, I would like some wheat. And so he says, okay, go get the measuring cup of what you want, and I'll measure some out for you. So when she brought it, he took the measure in his hand, the measuring cup, and he said, and she chose a big cup, and he looks at her and goes, this is too much, right? She's there for charity, right? And his response to her as this generous, charitable monk was, no, you're asking too much, right? And so it says, and he put the widow to blush, right? She was worried, embarrassed. So when she had gone, this monk who observed it says to the Abba, who also, it says, and is a priest, and saying, were you selling the wheat to the widow? And he said, no, I was giving it to her as charity. And he said, if you did this, if you gave her this wheat to her in charity, why were you so harsh and humiliate her? Right? So our words, and like for all we know, this guy might have thought he was teaching her. And I was like, but your words can harm, right? So be careful with your words. Words are knives, right? You've got to be very careful. There can also be psychological healing, and here I'm not asking anyone to try and act like they're a psychotherapist or a psychologist, but what I mean is the effect is there. When you take on the loads of other people by being human with them, right? On one occasion, Abba Macarius, a pretty good saint, went to visit a certain monk and found him to be ill. And the ill monk asked, St. Macarius asked him if he wanted anything to eat because he noticed that there was no food in his cell. And the monk, who was he was ill, he was like, you know what I really want? I want honey cakes. So Abba Macarius heard this, set out for Alexandria, and it says he did not regard his journey as trouble, even though it was 60 miles away from them, and he brought the honey cakes to give to the sick monk. And this he did himself and did not tell anyone else to bring them, and the old man thus made manifest the solicitude he had for them. This guy just said, I want honey cakes, right? I doubt it was his expectation, right, that St. Macarius was going to go to the city and get honey cakes. I don't think it was anybody's expectation that the monk was going to go to the city, right, to get honey cakes. But by him just saying, sure, why not? Right, I'll take the journey. I'll take my own personal khilwa, my own personal retreat of this long trek, right? If that makes, and it was for what need? Just honey cakes, right? It wasn't words. It was, if I can ease this guy's burden a little bit, right, with something that he likes, he'll feel refreshed, right? Sometimes just by kindnesses like this, it's like when our Lord would say, right? Like let the kids come. When everyone's like, no, he's the celebrity, right? So they're all trying to rip their kids away, and he's just like, why are you taking them away? Let them come, right? Or when they're all railing at the lady, and he's like, leave her alone. She does a good thing, right? You're showing some kind of understanding, right? In those moments, and that moment of understanding eases burdens, right? You've done a little bit of healing just by taking that off of someone. And so then your mindset of healing actually becomes more natural by doing things like that. Now, in our healing, we also need to care about practical needs. And I'm just showing you how much God works with that mindset. The same Macarius, the good saint, he's a great, but not as great as Saint Anthony. There's a story where this poor lady, like, they needed to find the money, and the guy who knows is dead, right? And so Saint Macarius literally went up to the guy's corpse and says, "Get up and tell us where you put it." And he did, and they all went nuts, and then they were worshiping him as a god. And he's like, "What's your problem? This was God, for the sake of this widow." Right? Like, he immediately was like, why are you so shocked? God cares about this widow, right? So I'm saying is, God raised the dead for a moment to give an answer for the sake of this person's need because someone cared, right? Macarius being like, "Not my problem, what do you do? She's dead." He's dead, right? Like, that it would have been a valid answer, right? But he cared so much about her that he had this confidence in God that it would happen. Living the gospel. There's a story from Abba Daniel Shahid. He's another, there's a really good book, if you haven't read it, Witness to Holiness, Abba Daniel Shahid. If you haven't read it, you should take a look. But there's this famous story in it that I know a fellow monk who saw the exact same story happen in real life at a monastery he used to go visit at. But there's a story from Abba Daniel about this person who was possessed. I'll read it on fast forward. Abba Daniel told the story that there was in Babylon of Egypt, which is Old Cairo, the daughter of a man who was the captain of a company of soldiers, and she was possessed of a devil. Her dad took her to a lot of places. Nobody could heal her. Her father had a friend who was a monk, so he said, "You know what? No one's able to cure her. Maybe those monks could do something. But even if we ask them to do this, they will not agree to it because they flee from the love of praise." Right? So when they went to go to the monks who were selling their baskets, he said, "Go to them, pretend you want to buy some, and when they come to sell, take the price of the baskets from your house, and we'll say to them, put up a prayer that our maiden would be healed." He's like, let's try and trick them. Just be like, set the cost and ask for this healing. And the man did so. As they came, as it were, to buy baskets, they found the disciple of these holy men sitting down and selling them. They took him and the baskets and carried him to their houses, and then they set another man in his place, and commanded him when the monks came to bring to them. Now when their disciple entered the house, the maiden who was possessed of a devil went forth. So they've kidnapped this monk. And so the possessed girl goes to this monk that they were hoping would heal, and she slaps him across the face. Think of the story from Anthony earlier. But then that monk automatically fulfilled the commandment, turned the other cheek, and straightway the devil was expelled from her. Right? So just by living the gospel, an exorcism happened. Right? I have a friend who witnessed this, like where there was a worker among them. He wasn't a monk yet when he was a worker. It was in Egypt. The person was possessed, and this monk who had the gift of foresight said to one of them, "I want you to remember the gospel today." Right? He knew that the person was actually going to head for that person. So the person who was possessed went and slapped that person, and only because Abuna said, "Remember the gospel today," did he even think to turn the other cheek. And the same thing happened, and that was just 15 years ago, in this millennium. So the person wasn't even healed in this story because of this person having the gift of exorcism. This person actually didn't have the gift of exorcism, or at least it's not clear necessarily that they did. What did it was they're living the gospel, right? And so we need to take that seriously. Right? We're very good at talking about the gospel. We're not very good at doing the gospel, right? And that's like, if we don't, the amount of healings that can happen from that, whether it's by a word, doesn't need to be supernatural. I'm like, but the power of the gospel is real. And it's funny because even the people thought that the healing that was going to happen, they believed it was going to happen, but they thought it was going to happen differently, right? They thought it was going to be like a laying on of hands and a prayer, right? But the healing that Christ worked didn't match their expectations. Having said that, even as servants, there are such thing as healing gifts and talents, right? Those also exist, right? So some people have the gift of physical healing, right? Pope Carlos had this gift, right? It's not a common one, but it does exist, and the person has that gift that is for the healing of the people, right? If someone has that, great, lucky community. But there are other talents that we might have, right? That should be used for healing. Some people might have the talent of being compassionate. Then that talent should be used for the community, right? Of being like, okay, some people have no tolerance of somebody who's venting, right? Where they're like, dude, like, not my problem, right? Whereas another person's like, just naturally, they don't even think about it. They're like, oh no, you look distressed, what's up, right? And like, I have all day right? Those people do exist. That should be used. You could be very healing in doing that. Others are just good listeners. Others find it much easier than others to give of their time. Others have the gift of being extremely joyful, where it's like this is great. Others, it's knowing how to diagnose. My bishop has this incredible gift of diagnosing, that I'm excited to bring like case scenarios and problems, right? Because I'm just like, okay, how do you look at this? Because you're so good at it, right? I feel like all the problems become way simpler because he just somehow knows how to cut right through it. It's a gift, right? And so in seeing that, it's like, okay, my burden is less because there's some guy who knows how to do it, right? I don't need to do it because someone else does. And now the whole problem can get fixed through that. Like I said, people are joyful. There are some people I've met that are just so joyful that like, I know if I see them, I'm going to be smiling no matter my mood, right? That's a gift. It's a healing thing, right? That it pulls somebody out of what they're in just by being near them, right? Of being like, yeah, I don't know, when this person's around, I'm in a good mood. And it's like, because there's something real in them and they've got the joy of Christ in them for whatever, like, it is. Others are just gifted at speaking the truth, where like, they might not be the super joyful kind, but they don't do this, right? They're not wishy-washy. They just cut it straight. And so those are people like I feel safe that I can go to them to hear the truth as it is, where I'm excited. I want somebody to just tell me what is it, right? That I'm like, great, that could heal somebody through that talent. So I'm like, is be aware of these things. Some people are incredible storytellers. Abuna Anthony Murad, God bless him, he's just got a gift. Like we were serving at a retreat together, and we were taking turns, we were telling stories, and he was like, Abuna, tell one of your stories. I'm like, you tell one of my stories. Like he just tells it way better. He has some gift that reaches the hearts and it connects with absolutely everybody that's there. And everybody, no matter what they were thinking of whatever, whether it's a sermon or a story, Lee's being like, that was so sick. And I'm like, it's a gift. Right? And so people leave relieved, right? They leave healed because of this talent or because of a gift. Others, their gift of being selfless. Some people, because of their generosity, cure others of their vices, right? I'm awful with money, and I'm right? But when I see people who just indiscriminately give, it helps heal me of saying, why am I so attached to my money, right? Why am I not like that? Why is this person so easily able to just give it? Even one person I was talking to, where they're like, I was like, I know like this might be suspect, and if you don't want to give, it was they're not to give me, they wanted to give to somebody else, and like they looked confused, like, oh, I don't ask questions like that. They're like, I give to the Lord. I'm not interested in that detail. And I was like, wow, I felt the need to assess, right? To be like, is this worth it? Is it blah, blah, blah. So somebody's talent can heal another person of their vice, right? Or if somebody just doesn't judge, and you're somebody who judges like crazy, and then you're like, yeah, I can't believe that happened. And then the other person's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. I just saw and insert something positive. And you're like, oh, and suddenly you're healed of whether it's your arrogance, your pride, your judgment by somebody else living the gospel. Some people are so peaceful that they heal other people of their anger, or at least get them on the road to getting it treated, because the presence of a very peaceful person exposes the extreme disease, right, of the other. I told this story a million times, and we did at Holy Nativity, so for those who've already heard this many times, you can tune out if you want. Is a story that I remember with Abuna Lazarus, where Abuna Lazarus in Egypt is not always friendly at all. And when he prays in the cave, like he can't stand, this is being recorded, I should be more careful with what I say. He can be aggressive with the boys that pray in the cave, like from the retreat. So there's one day he was extra aggressive. And I was judging him like no tomorrow. And so I'm like, because these poor kids in my mind, I'm like, they're here at the monastery, they want a blessing, they want to be joyful, and they got reamed, and I thought they were not that bad, and they left the monastery, like, I'm assuming, unhappy. So I was chilling with Abuna Lazarus at his own cave the next day, and while we're hanging out, I'm not even talking about anything deep yet, and in my mind, I'm just constantly like, hate that you did that. And I'm just like, it wasn't nice, and you didn't need to do that, and they weren't that bad. And then I'm trying to challenge my own thoughts. I'm like, but it's not my business, and maybe he did it on purpose, and, right? So in the middle of this like mental warfare, whereas out loud I'm like, yeah, how about them Leafs and whatever, normal, like I don't ever talk about the Leafs, but he looked at me and just like, yeah, I'm sometimes aggressive with the youth. And so I'm like, okay, he had read my mind, right? And so he was like, yeah, it's a struggle. He goes, I'm not a calm person, and to be honest with you, I can't say all of it because it's being recorded, but he was very upfront about his struggle, right? And so I was so moved by the same man who's reading my thoughts, right, is talking about a struggle right now where like he has an anger issue, right? But then I was healed of my judgment, but also got to learn, I was healed also of different assumptions, being like, why did I think that holy people don't sin? Of course they do. And they're gonna have warfares just like me. And so another thing got fixed. That's like, it's beautiful to see how gifts and talents can be used to heal people of their different things. Two more things. I'm on high speed, and I think there'll be time this time actually for questions, which is good. Healing through prayer. Our Lord actually himself prayed before miracles, right? The internal prayer and the audible prayer can help. And intercession is real. When I say intercession is real right now, I don't just mean intercession of the saints. I mean your intercession for people, right? Is that I'm saying, yes, the saints do that, but so do we. We're supposed to intercede for one another as well. There was an incident of somebody that I know where their dad was in a major like legal conundrum. And they called Abuna Angelos Antoni, God repose his soul. And he like started trying to tell him the story, and like Abuna just cut him off. He's like, yeah, I know. And he's like, so like, and he's like, just don't worry about it. In 3 days, it's all going to be fixed, right? And it seemed unfixable, right? 3 days later, the person who was suing the person, right, called apologizing, being like, I can't believe I treated you so badly. He had every right to sue. Like it wasn't an accident, right? It wasn't an accident that he sued, I mean. And he was like, and you know what? I'm going to transfer like all my business. I'm going to do this and this and this. Like it suddenly turned the complete 180 degrees because some person chose to pray. Right? Like that was an intercession from this person, and God takes that seriously. That's why whatever you pray, if 2 or 3 people gather in my name, I'm in the midst. He's like, ask in earnest. He told us to, right? So are you even praying for people? Because that can be a part of your ministry of healing, right? Do you actively, intentionally think about people and their issues and pray about it, right? If you've done some outreach and the person is so upset, do you come home and just analyze it with your own mentality, being like, this is why I told them, blah, blah, blah. I might need to add more words because we love words, more words. And it's like, did you go home and be like, Lord, I don't know, like what, like help them, right? I don't know if they can handle this. Turn it into prayer. Like, would you, like, and you'll deepen your own life, but you become an intercessor for somebody else. But you need to be pushed out of your comfort zone to an extent, right? Like the healing isn't going to come from you resting. St. Peter, I doubt, was comfortable when he was walking on the water, right? And that in spite of walking on water, still lost focus and fell, right? It's not a comfort zone. Or even the same St. Peter, the vision he had before Cornelius, where Christ had to prep him, right, of being like, your way of thinking is wrong, right? And I'm going to ask you to go to a Gentile, right? And when you go, you can't be you, right? You think everything he's doing is wrong. It's not. I already know, right? So sometimes we need to be pushed out of there. Christ was always offering himself, therefore we must be, right? The crowds followed and wanted to hear him because there was something about him and because he was present to them, right? They could access him. And that's why they were mesmerized, and that's why this whole movement happened around him, and that's why people got jealous. But if you're not available to people, you won't heal them. So are you available as a servant, right? Or are you finding all the ways to be as unavailable as you can, right? Are you making a million reasons why you can't be available? We have to push ourselves. I'm not saying like there's a discernment, there's a wisdom, that's why we have spiritual guides for, but I'm saying, but it is not okay to not be uncomfortable and to not give. Right? There has to be some aspect of that. And you've got to be inviting. right? It's not just be available, but if you're available, you're like, okay, I'm here. What do you want? Right? Then it's like, no, thank you. Sorry, you're having a bad day. Like, I'm not interested. Thank you. I feel better about myself. The Samaritan woman, right? Christ was inviting, she could speak. St. Macarius, we've done a lot of Macarius today, but that's okay, so they don't feel left out. But the story of the monk who had fallen, St. Macarius, when he made himself inviting, right, to him, where it's just like, yeah, I struggle too, right? I've had this. Suddenly, this person was much more comfortable talking about his weaknesses. So being inviting and then in a disposition of wanting to be used. By that I mean is if you're in communion with God, then you will be in a disposition of saying, Lord, I am yours, send me. Right? But if you're not in communion with God, you're not even going to have those thoughts, right? It's mind-blowing to me that Eli, the priest, that he even thought of those words. But it means he did have some kind of relationship with God. To even advise Samuel of saying, tell him, here I am, I'm at your service, right? At your will. The final thing is belief. You will not be a healer if you don't believe. In him, in his word, in his power. And that should sound like an obvious, but I don't know how many of us really believe. I don't know how many of us really think that when we pray, it makes any difference. I don't know how many of us really think that the service is of any value other than filling time and doing something good for God, right? But do you really, really actually believe? Because if you do, then God might work through you. If you don't believe, God might work through you, but he won't be able to work in you, right? Because he could by incidentally use you. But being open to it, he can do both. Christ was rejected by people in his own hometown. Their disbelief prevented their healing, right? Their unwillingness, right, to accept him as he is meant them not being healed. In fact, it says he could not he would not. It says he could not because of their unbelief. The disciples couldn't heal a demoniac, and the Lord said it bluntly, he's like, because you don't believe. Right? It was his automatic reaction. He's like, yeah, you can't heal them. You're unable to heal because you actually don't believe. Peter walking on water, like we said, he started by believing, but then his doubt made him sink. Right? He took his eyes off of that. So again, you need to know him. And there's nothing wrong with saying, Lord, help my unbelief. Right? God still healed that person, right? Who was upfront about it. So I'll end there. May God work in and through of us to be vessels of healing to his flock. To him be glory now in all age of all ages. Amen. There's time for some questions. Abuna Gilo sent one up.
Abuna? Abuna Bishoy. Is there time for some questions now? Or no? Sure. Okay. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me just pull up the questions.
Abuna sent a question. I'll start until it goes out.
Okay, sure.
Why the father and the prodigal son? Why did the father give the inheritance for his son, expecting that his son will use these things in a bad way? I know Abuna can answer this way better than me, so I'm embarrassed to answer in front of Abuna. But it's the complete and full freedom that God gives us of whether we want to return love or not. Right? Because this son, even in asking for the inheritance, is actually saying to his dad, can we pretend you're dead? Because the inheritance is supposed to be what you inherit because they're dead. Right? And so it was the full freedom of saying, I know you might use your freedom wrongly, but I will never force you to love me.
Okay. So there was a question, there's lots of questions here in the Slido. So one here that says, what should I do when I struggle to forgive someone who deeply hurt me, even though I know I should?
Choice. Like that's why we keep coming back to it. What do you choose to do with your free will? Right? I was saying you can choose to ruminate on it. You can choose to replay the events in your head. You can choose to keep telling the story to everybody who will listen. Right? You can choose to quote unquote vent about it, which is sometimes code word for just gossip and slander. Sometimes it's really venting, often it's not. Those are all choices. Or you can say, Lord, I will try in your name to forgive them, right? Or what St. Anthony was saying, okay, start off by, if you can't turn the other cheek, let them keep slapping you. If you can't, it's like, okay, don't return evil for evil. Take those as goals, right? Of being, okay, they're gossiping about me, I won't gossip back, right? They're lying about me, I'm gonna not lie back. Or I won't defend myself, right? I won't go out and say it. If you start choosing rightly, this is the part that I think people forget, is that's when you see God's grace. That's when you start to experience what health looks like, and you actually won't want after that to judge or be angry or to harbor resentment, right? But the thing is, your anger, this is something my father confessed this to me once when I was getting so angry about something that I was playing out the scenes in my head over and over, and I was like, I was even having imaginary conversations with the person, right? Where I would rip them apart, like, and then they're gonna say this, and I'm gonna say, like, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, did your conversation go anywhere? Did it change the guy? I was like, no. And he's like, and it won't. And he was like, your anger is hurting you. And it's not hurting that guy, and it's not fixing it, and it's doing nothing. So do you just want to be miserable? Right? So that's, I'm like, think of it in that way. If you view it only in the I being wronged, right, then you're not going to get anywhere. Yes, you're wrong because people have freedom, and we use our freedom in good and wrong and bad ways. If you want to really go a little bit deeper, you can probably think of times where you might have wronged others, and you can use that to get out of the mood of being like, oh, I've also wronged others, and I would wish that they don't hold it against me forever, right? I am the son or daughter of this God who is so wrong that they actually murdered him, right? I have not been wronged unto murder. Like, use these things to help bring you down, so that you can start saying, okay, and do I choose peace? Do I choose forgiveness? It's a choice, right? So it has to be worked on. Go ahead.
Tell somebody that, you wrong me and that's not okay. Like, is there contradiction between choosing peace and setting a boundary, saying, you wrong me, I'm not happy with that? Are those, like, stating that, is that like contradicting what you're proposing? Because I
think so. I think so, even though that's become the common language, like where we're always telling people set boundaries, set boundaries, set boundaries. I think that if we're gonna set boundaries, and here I'm talking about boundaries because of a wronging, I'm not talking about boundaries period, because I've learned that sometimes what I'm saying gets misinterpreted. But if I say because of this wrong, I'm setting this line, I need to know that that's not perfection of the gospel. So that even if I do that, I should have in my mind that this is because of my weakness. Because if I was perfect, Christ said, even unto death, right? Like, is what he said. But like, I'm not there. And I'm not asking people to pretend that they're there. But I should at least mentally realize, like, okay, if I were perfect, I wouldn't think X, Y, and Z. But I do, right? Where am I at, and how can I work at it? Because I'm not there yet, and that's okay, right? And that's saying sometimes for the sake of peace or life or sanity, we end up doing that. Like, I get it. But I should still be thinking, but is my actual aim and goal reconciliation? Yes or no? And I recognize that there's a whole bunch of factors to how that can happen. But I'm just saying, but is it my goal? Regardless of what complicates the goal, is it my goal? Because if it's not, I'm in the wrong, right? If it is, then whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 10 years, hopefully it'll happen. But it's that I'm working on it, even if it's pieces. What I usually tell people is what you can handle plus one. Because what you can handle is just being comfortable doing nothing about it, right? Where I'm like, that's not the gospel. What you can handle plus one is being like, okay, I don't want to talk to this person. I think I could handle 0. I'm like, what is 0 plus 1 in your situation, right? Maybe it won't be talking. Maybe it'll be like, just be in their presence for all of 2 minutes, once a month. Right? And you don't even have to talk, but of just the challenge of saying, I shouldn't be okay with this, I should want it to change.
Okay, thank you. So we have time for one more question before the break. This seemed to be a popular question, might be slightly controversial, but I will still bring it out. So, how do we serve someone who is LGBTQ and show love without judging them? Especially if this person is a close family member and there's no way to avoid them.
Do the gospel. Right? The gospel, doing the gospel didn't differentiate what kind of quote-unquote sinner that you met, when we're all sinners, right? So we would never, with anybody struggling with anything, affirm wrong. Like, I'm not be like, no, in your case, like, stealing is great, like, because of your situation. It would be like, whereas I might be understanding the situation, being like, I get that you stole because of your zuruf, like your situation. It's not okay, but, and how can I help, right? So being supportive, being honest, recognizing that their struggle is unique and difficult, right? In existentially, right? That this is just like a bad habit, right? Like this is something much more. So it's do the gospel the way that you do the gospel to absolutely anybody else, but that they have just a different warfare in it, right? And we're never going to call wrong right and right wrong. Like, I want to be clear on that. But we also don't need to shove that down someone's face, especially when someone's struggling and already knows it's wrong, right? If somebody's coming to me saying, hey, I know stealing is wrong, I'm like, no, you don't get it. Stealing is like wrong, right? And like, yeah, I know, that's why I'm talking to you. I'm like, but it's wrong, right? We wouldn't do that. I hope you wouldn't do that, right? So in the same vein of being like, the person's already coming saying that, I know it's wrong, I'm just struggling, cool. What do you need from me? How can I help? If someone's saying, I don't understand why it's wrong, then you now know what they're asking for help in, right? So just be human, right? Be human, live the gospel, and don't overthink it. Get guidance about it if you're worried that there's something going on, or for like the intricacies, but I don't think it needs to be dramatically different. Crickets. All right, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, amen. This talk is probably gonna be the least humble, even though it's one about humility. This is partially event, bad words. So it's supposed to be the humility of the servant and washing, what it's like to have the spirit of washing one another's feet. But I'm going to take some jabs, and I'm guilty of the very things that I'm going to say, because I think that we've actually made even washing feet flashy. So that even the washing feet doesn't even seem humble anymore. It's just like, yeah, I get to wash feet because I have this badge. Like we've managed to even make it weird. So I might take some shots here only because I think that the disease of arrogance is all of us, myself included, and it hits so hard. And I think it's one of the biggest parts of the disease in the service is these different kinds of lacks of humility. So, just as a recap, this was said in the meeting last night, but everyone was there. Is humility is, like, if we want to get more definitional, it's taking something like basically small t thing and holding it against capital T thing. That's all it is. It's actually a very objective thing. It's not about how you feel about yourself. There's different things that could be a sign of your lack of humility. So what I mean, like, in a second is to say, if there's a proper way of being, right, humility is to hold up the thing that was designed against what it was designed to be and saying, do they match? So it's a very objective thing. So if I am the image and likeness of God, I am small I image and he's capital I image. So I just need to look at myself relative to him and say, do they match? Where they don't, I am wrong. And where they do, I'm actually right. And there's no pride in that. There's like, you can even in humility know that you are correct. You would just know that you're not the source of correctness, right? It would be, I'm correct because I match capital T, truth, right? That's all it is. So the reason I'm saying that is that for humility of anything, whether it's humility of speech, eyes, service, is to say, what is the proper, what is the noun, what is the straight line about it say, and where am I relative to that? Whatever is not that is what needs to be fixed. When we lose humility, it's when we think that we are the source of capital T truth, of like, it's right because I said it, right? Or even right because that person said it, that isn't why it's right. And that's why even in humility, like with the social sense of the word that we're usually using, it's never even who am I compared to other people. Because other people are also just in the image and likeness of God. It's not right or wrong because Uncle the Saint is that. Like, Uncle the Saint is that because Christ is that, not because he is that. So we have to be clear of that. And it'll become more clear what I mean by that in a second. But the framing verse that I actually want to use with this is, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And if I can very presumptuously add, I would say don't just think on these things, talk about these things. is that once we stray from these, this is like the best list to follow, the speech is probably not good. And the thoughts are probably not good. It's either going to be negative or outright wrong. Now, if we want to get into what does the humble servant look like, number one is discipleship. Okay, and again, I'm gonna rocket through some of these. Are you a disciple, or do you think you're the physician? Right? Do you think that with no training, you just know always what to do and what's the right thing to say and what the right thing to do? And then everybody sit at the table and be like, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that. And I'm like, right? Like, what makes you know? And we've all done that, right? Like, I'm very guilty of all the things that we're talking about. But of being like, did I ask? Right? Imagine if like there's like it's akin to being like, yeah, like you're diagnosing because you can use ChatGPT. I mean, that's even more helpful. At least there's ChatGPT. But before, even with Google, do you think that you could walk in and be like, no, obviously he doesn't have colon cancer? And it's like, obviously based on what? Did you take his labs? Right? Did you do any imaging? Like, do you even know how to read an image? And I'm like, why do you think there's those symptoms? How do you know it wasn't a differential? Why do you think you know? Right? And again, I'm speaking to myself too. I'm not trying to be aggressive outwardly. I'm speaking to me as well. Do you get advice about your giving advice? Right? Like that's something that should be done. Right? Of being like, what does it look like? These people ask me. I know that when I first started saying, like, I actually would panic because I understood that I knew nothing. I was just lucky that I really knew that. Right? And be like, oh no, this person asked me this. And I was like, I was in the spot, so I said this, and blah, blah, blah. And so I started getting advice, thinking, no, here's how you could deal with that. When you're in the spot, here's a way to look at it. And the goal, just to be clear, in discipleship, hopefully, is not to control you. Like, if so, then that relationship needs to be visited. So, like, for those who are anxious about that, the goal is not to be, we're not trying to say that you have no ability, like, to serve. You were hired because you can serve, right? Like, all of us. So there's not an assumption of like, oh, no, you shouldn't be. It's saying, what is the right scope? I sometimes, for the sake of understanding, compare, because a priest is just a different kind of servant. Right? We're still servants. There's not ayam kunt khadem, like the days when I'm still a servant, right? There's just a specific one. I would say that the non-priestly service, maybe an analogy that could work is saying it's kind of like nursing. You have your own scope of practice, and it is your own. Like, you have an actual scope, and you actually have a lot of time with the patient, actually even more so than usually the physician will. And you might actually even know the patient often better than the physician might even know. It's even possible, right? And so it's like, work within your scope because it's a real scope and it's a beautiful scope. I'm not going to lie, God forgive me, I know it's being recorded. I never wanted to have the different scope. I liked the nursing scope. There's a whole beauty to it, and there's a lot that you get to do when it's in there. So stay within that and get advice about it. Right? And that's saying inevitably you're going to learn stuff. You might be more in tune to the symptoms of the patient than the physician because you're seeing them. Right? You might even start to notice patterns of being like, oh, I've seen this before. Whenever this thing starts to happen, right, it usually means X, Y, and Z, right? So, but get advice about it. I remember, I overuse this example, but that's me, I'm just repetitious. But I remember in my home church that, like, when I had gone through my own phase internally, and then I took like an intro Phil course in first year, I came back like fiery to Abuna, and I'm like, we need to give a talk about atheism. And of course I thought, like, who else other than myself? But then, like, I'm like all excited, and Abuna's like, no. And I was like, why not? Like, this is a serious issue, and I'm all bum hurt. And he was just like, I hear their confessions. This isn't really an issue right now. And you exposing them could be a problem, right? And so it's like, if this person was not thinking about it and then you've now said it, now they're going to have the thoughts, and then we're going to start an issue. 3 years later, he actually was like, please go give the talk. Now it is the right time. Right? Without even bringing it. So I've never forgotten that lesson personally. I had an incident I was talking about in one place I was serving, where I said something in confession where I named a sin, and the person goes, "Oh, what's that?" And I was like, "Oh shoot!" Like, I think I exposed them, and it was gonna do damage. And I was like, oh, this is not okay. I'm like, how do I play this down? What if he Googles it? I'm like, this is gonna be a problem. 5 minutes later, he goes, by the way, I know what it is. I was just joking. And I'm like, oh. But I was like, I got lucky that he was just joking. But I could have done damage. And I remember that lesson of being like, yeah, when it was real in front of me that I might have actually exposed somebody. Don't think you know what you're doing. Don't think you have the right advice. You might have it. I'm just saying, don't assume you do, right? It's about your assumption. It's not about whether you're factually correct. It's about how you view yourself and your mind, right? Humility in speech, this is a really big one. And this is like, I find it so aggravating. How you teach, how you talk about people. Right? Do you base things on dogma and tradition or on yourself? How much of your speech is presented dogmatically without even challenging it if it even was dogmatic? Right? Your speech needs to be true, not lies. I know that seems very obvious, but I don't think it is. You need to be precise. Don't say things you don't know to be true. And if you don't know it to be true, but it's valuable, then preface it as such, right? My understanding is such and such, right? What I received was such and such, but not, obviously, this is what it is, right? Don't speculate. And again, I'm using the word don't a lot, forgive me, and I mean it to me too. I'm not just saying that to be fake humble. I'm aware that I fall into this too, right? Don't speculate about things in a way that causes problems, right? So when you're talking about the service, if you're saying, I wonder if so-and-so did that because, insert whatever because is, you just inserted a whole thing of making people imagine, judge, gossip, slander, right? And it's like, and for what? And you won't even have an answer. You have no idea why he did or didn't do it, right? And now you've introduced something just from your speech. This is not humility of speech, because humility of speech means what is my speech compared to proper speech. That's what it means in context of speech, right? In proper speech, we don't lie, we don't slander, we don't gossip, we don't insert whatever the gospel has said, right? So I should always be comparing against that. Or saying, I bet so-and-so said that because. Don't offer speech about things that don't concern you, right? Then we get into lies and gossip, and these things have a real effect on the service and the served, right? These are the things that really rock churches, even though they seem so small. These are the small things that lead to, are you part of team so-and-so or team so-and-so? These are things being like, yeah, I'm more of the school of this person versus this person, where it's not even a real school. It's more like, oh, in these fights, I'm more likely to align with Germany, and I'm with Russia, and here I'm with whatever. Like, this is not what church is about. That is not what speech is for. And if that happens in our service, which it often does, we break it, right? And then you come back with the stories, right? Yeah, uncle did such and such to us. Why? Because he doesn't like our service, obviously. Right? And then you'll use the word obviously because apparently it's obvious, right? Of being like, no, and he's trying to shut it down. And I saw him. He sat with Abuna so-and-so, who I know for a fact doesn't like our service. And so now they're trying to stop it, and I bet you tons so-and-so probably told this story, and that's why we have to make sure that, like, and you start positioning and the stories increase. I'm like, it is not just non-humble. You really break things. Right? People are going to make mistakes. Should that be our speech? That's why I started with the what sort of things are pure, lovely, true, honorable, all those things. Is that what we're talking about? Instead of being like, man, that was such a great lesson. The kids were really excited, right? It's just like, that was so long. And we go into something negative, right? And then being like, I don't know if we can trust them to serve. Like, I mean, I know they mean well, and I don't want to judge them, but like, no one relates to them, right? And then wherever that takes us, right? And then suddenly we're excluding people from service, and we're making people have opinions, and then we are assessing things that we shouldn't assess. This is all from how we talk, right? This isn't the right way to build. So when you reference other servants, what do you sound like, right? Are you the kind that's like, yeah, obviously uncle did that. I wouldn't expect otherwise, right? That's a statement. Do you chuckle a lot sarcastically? Right, where like someone's name come up and you're just like, huh, yeah, no, go ahead, continue yours. We know, right? That's a statement, right? There's nothing humble about that, right? And you're causing a whole bunch of reactions. And there might be somebody who loved uncle and like, oh wait, do we not like uncle? Like, I mean, you can. I mean, we love everyone, right? And then the hypocrisy comes out. Do you say things like, you know, because we love our I statements, I usually agree with so-and-so. As if your agreement matters, right? Who cares if you usually agree with uncle? Is what uncle is saying true or not true? Is what Tan's saying true or not true? It's not whether you have evaluated it to be true. Who are you, right? It's not about you or me. It's what is the truth, and what are we saying compared to the truth? That's how we can teach. That's how we can grow. But if I make myself the standard, then I'm saying, I would like you all to be in the image and likeness of me, right? There is nothing holy about that. It's like saying, we said the framing thing was the disciples washing, Christ washing disciples' feet, right? And then us saying, I am now the model because I washed as Christ did. Now emulate me. And it's like, no, but you were always supposed to be emulating him, right? It's not an icon of you washing the feet, right? It's an icon of him washing the feet, and we're supposed to match that. I was giving a cheesy example, but I don't think I need to. I'm thinking of just some examples I've seen. A servant wrote an article that I remember about a certain bishop that he loved that had departed. And he wrote it to rejoice. I'm just giving you examples of where we do this in the service, and even when it can look small. The person wrote it to rejoice in the life of that saintly bishop and to expose others to the bishop. That was his only motive, right? It was just, he was excited, right? So a youth read it, loved it, and then went to a priest who happened to know that bishop and was like, oh, did you get a chance to read like what that person wrote? Like, it was so beautiful. Like, I know you knew him. And they were going because they want more stories. And that servant's response was, I know who he thinks he is to write about that bishop. I know that bishop, right? And it's just like, why'd you kill it? Like, why can't everyone love the saintly bishop, right? Why did only you have access, right, to the saintly bishop? So like, we do these things. And sometimes it's just because we're excited to tell that we had a special relationship. Okay, cool. There might be a proper way to say that if it needs to be said, right? But it's not like that, right? Like, how are we speaking? Is everything you say sarcastic? Right? Because sarcasm, especially if it's sarcasm about a person or a service, is not righteous, right? And I'm very sarcastic if you haven't picked up on that yet. But I knew a servant who was so sarcastic that as a servant, when he served, let there be light, I would laugh when he dished it, but I never wanted to approach because I was so scared I'd get cut up. Where I'm like, ha, I'm like, not me. Like if I'm going to you, I want to feel secure. I don't need you to tell me like how dumb you think I am. Where I'm like, I'm already aware that I might be dumb, and I suspect it. But when you keep telling me it, I'm like, I'm not getting anything from you, right? In the way you talk about ideas. I'm going to use an example, it sucks to use here because you guys have many incredible iconographers. But when people would say things like, no, that's not an icon, I'm sorry, that's a painting. Right? And it's just said like this dogma, I'm like, oh, is it? Right? And it's like, yeah, that's a painting. We don't do that. And it's like, why? Because it didn't have gold leaf? Right? When did a painting turn into an icon? If Luke was the first iconographer, did Luke know he was writing an icon? Or was he painting a portrait? And when did it get the name? And why was it called that? And when did it get gold leaf? Right? And when did it get standardized? I'm not demeaning for any of it, but I believe there is such thing as beauty and iconography, etc. And I'm not the expert. You have them sitting in this congregation. But my point is that language, right? It's so divisive, right? It's saying, I'm on this team very strongly. Are you going to think like me, huh? Or are you one of them? Right? And then that becomes literally our language. Right, of being like, there are people who think, right, and then we've categorized them, right? This is not humble language, and it is so divisive, right? Teach the beauty of something rather than talking about the negative. Instead of saying, here's these bad people do this, instead be like, isn't it so beautiful that, and insert the positive. That's why, we started that thing from St. Paul, thing being a very important verse. Humility in ambition. I'm just trying to be mindful of time. What are you serving for? Are you a ladder climber? Right? Where you either want to be in charge of a service or you want to get ordained, right? Like that exists. There are people who do that. Do you want to give talks to get notice? Do you outreach youth because you want to be loved and get votes for your plan or whatever it is that you want next? Because it causes problems, right? Look at what happened when James and John's mother went to Christ and said, just طلب واحد بس يا رب. Right? And then, like you can picture a tons like saying that, right? I mean, حاجة واحدة بس, حاجة بسيطة بس يا رب. That my 2 kids are on your left and right to co-reign with you. And it says that the disciples spent the whole time fighting, right? Being like, who do they think they are and why not me and blah, blah, blah. That Christ is like, why were you fighting on the way? Like, oh, nothing. Right? And then he responds saying the right way is humility, just serve, right? So if we're being ambitious, you ruin things, right? It not only ruins you, it ruins the service, right? That's not why we serve. We serve because these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. We are just his vessels, right? Humility in positioning. Like I said, icons is an example. Screens or rituals, right? Of being like, no, I can't believe that Abuna did that. That is not a thought. Have you not seen the 1902 or whatever book it is that Boromos had? That's not what they did. Right? Therefore, home of Hemshfhaik. Right? And then you start all this stirring, they're like, oh wow, like, yeah, like that guy's dumb. Right? And then suddenly you're having all these arguments like the Mishkida. Right? Even if you want to question it, no problem, question it. Right? Be like, hey, I was wondering how come it's like that. I had read this where it had this. Why is it different? And then actually listen to the answer, not wait for them to finish to tell them why they're now dumb. I mean, no, I did it, I asked them. They're just dumb. Right? But it being like, no, stop and actually listen. Maybe there is another answer. Maybe there is another reason. Maybe there is room for multiple ways to do it. And if so, then are you just arguing for it to be the way that you want? Because then the service is going to suffer because, again, of our lack of humility. And we've got to be careful. When people say things like, all the fathers said, I'm like, really? Like, did you actually take down everything that they said, and you actually did the work to find out that they are actually completely congruent on all of these things? Because that's extremely rare. It's highly unlikely. In the places where they were, that's mostly where we have dogma, right? And there's not a lot of dogmatic statements that we make, right? So when you say all the fathers said, or the opposite of being like, no one ever did that, right? And it's like, watch your language. Don't be so presumptuous in your language. So never assume, this is key, never assume anything, right? I've been learning this over and over from assuming, right? I've done it over and over. I've told people don't assume, and I still assume, right? It takes a long time to root this out. Don't assume anything. Don't assume you know. Don't assume you understand. Don't assume you have enough data. Don't assume you're qualified. One fact can change your whole interpretation of a scenario. Just one fact, right? I've seen people hold grudges for years and years and years and years, and then one fact being presented changes it all, being like, oh, I didn't know that, right? And then suddenly it's like, oh man, but like the last 7 years we didn't talk because you assumed, right? If somebody says something, don't assume their intention, even if it looks ridiculously obvious. Don't assume you've interpreted it right. If you've lived with someone for 40 years, still don't assume just because you know them that well that you're right. You don't know. One of the biggest problems within marriages and families actually is that we assume them through the lens of how we viewed them all this time. So we don't see the changes and we don't see different intentions and we always view them in that certain way and it breaks down, right? And so it's so interesting that sometimes it's the outsider that's able to bring peace rather than the insider, because the person who's not assuming was saying, no, I was just listening. This person said this. So you keep saying that they mean this, but they're clearly saying that they don't. And like, you just don't know. You just, when you get to know them, you'll know. And it's like, but no, you're assuming that, and you're basically saying, unless they admit that I'm right, that is their intention, this argument's not over. Right? And so like, there's no winning for the other person. So then if they even say, khalas, you're right, for the sake of the argument to end, the other person's like, aha, see? I knew you'd eventually say the truth. And it's like, no, I said it because it's the only way to end it. And it keeps going. I'm like, don't. Like, this is not how we talk to you. There's no humility in that. And so this is how we are. every one of your relationships, even within the service, whether it's the system of the service or your outreach in the service or individual relationships with the youth, imagine, or whatever age you serve, imagine if you're quote unquote being served for whatever that means, right? And you're trying to actually have a real conversation, you're opening up, and the person's just like, so I think what you're actually trying to say is this. And you're like, no, it isn't. And then, you might not understand it, but you do mean that. And you're like, okay, I'm open to maybe meaning that, but I don't think I mean that. I'm saying this. And like, you do mean that, right? And then repeat over and over. You're just gonna be like, okay, I'm not opening up to this person, right? Thank you so much for your time, right? And then move on and not do it. We have to be careful with this. We need to have humility in knowing that others are as gifted or more than you, right? I remember when I joined LA Diocese and Embasarian moved me from the monastery to the city, like for service. I was okay, I come from Kitchener, we had an amazing youth service, like I'm the youth guy. So I had all these thoughts, like, oh, I have ideas, I know what could work, right? And I had all these things. And then I went within my first week in the diocese to their YSC, it's this competition they have. And I saw multiple hundreds of youth, if not over 1,000, it might actually have been over 1,000, that have memorized patristics, that are, like they had this whole competition that I never would have dreamed of, right? That I would have thought nobody would even have been interested in, right? Where they've memorized at hand, they've memorized patristics, they've done a book study and a Bible study, and they do all this stuff, and they're having a blast, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I didn't, like I thought I was the gift, right? And I'm like, no, I didn't know this happened. And I'm like, I was happy if we were gonna plan like a retreat. Like, and I'm like, there's like, I'm not all that, right? Is huge for us to learn. It's like King Saul and King David, right? King Saul and King David were both called, and they were called dramatically, and they were both nobodies. King Saul had a complex when King David appeared, right? When people started singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David, right? Then it was just like, I don't like David. And then that whole drama of trying to kill him. This is service. The kingship was a service, right? And they were using their service to kill well, one was using it to kill another person, right? And everybody saw it. Everybody knew it. David had to go into hiding. It was such a public fight. So be careful. I can say this even though this person, I think they left, but there's someone who moved to our church from another province. And like, so the crew that I was close with suddenly started hanging out. Oh no, he's here. They started hanging out at his house all the time, right? And I didn't have a house yet. And so they're like, yo, we're chilling at this person's house, chilling at this person's house. And I'm like, oh, I hope you're having fun, right? With the whole like self-pity thing, right? And then they're like, why don't you come? Like, no, it's okay. Right? I'm like, oh, I'm just so glad you like him. You guys should go over there. Right? I'm like, why am I bothered? It was jealousy. That's all it was. It being like, I thought I was the loved one. And like, apparently not. Right? And it's just like, get over it. Right? And then even realizing that it wasn't even the case. Right? And the person can be Azim who was like the matigi. Right? And it's just like at the beginning, I'm like, no, it's okay. I want them to love you. Right? And it's like, no, I didn't. Right? Like it was the complete opposite. I actually didn't. I'm like, no. Hopefully they're like, yeah, we're over it. We want you. That's not service. That's not love. Not even just service. There's nothing right about that. Right? We've got to be careful about these things. Do you assess other servants' behaviors or advice? Because that's not our place. Right? It's not for us being like, that servant did this or that person said this. If you're the other servant that didn't give the advice, if you're saying like, oh, that's crazy, I can't believe that he or she said that. He said that, but probably he didn't understand X, Y, and Z, right? Whereas internally, like, wow, I can't believe someone said that. How does that help the service? How does that help the served? Look for truth in everything people say, or acknowledge that you don't know enough to arrive at the truth. So it's very simple. Right? So if somebody comes to me like, oh, because Abuna told me this, I'm like, I can't speak for what Abuna did. I'm sure Abuna was answering you with the knowledge that he has and with how he viewed the situation. Are you asking me to give an advice relative to Abuna, or are you asking my opinion? Because I'm not going to reevaluate Abuna's. If you're asking my own, then I have my own as my own. It's not my own versus Abuna so-and-so or servant so-and-so or whoever it is. I remember when I first got ordained, like I was judging so many priests of what I thought was lack of commitment, right? Like, now I'm the guy, like, who doesn't answer his text. I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, that person, like, left them on red. This person clearly needs to talk. Like, this person, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I am 100% that guy, right? But I didn't know. I didn't have knowledge, right? And I assumed the worst. I'm like, oh, they just don't care. Or they don't realize how serious it is. Right now, I'm like, they're probably drowning, right? Like, but I was like, no, I know. I'm like, I will take care of it. I will rise to the occasion, and then fall. Do you have the humility, do you think you're even qualified to do the service or give advice or give talks on certain things? I thought I was a Christology expert, and then I heard Bruno Macarius or fellows speak, and I'm like, I don't know anything. And so I'm like, now I'm like, okay, wow, like the exposure of another person, I'm like, I am not qualified. I realize that I'm just into it, but that guy knows. And so like, it's a different, like to be able to see the talents of others and be happy, right? Being, okay, good, there's another person covering it. I'm going on lightning, sorry, forgive me. We need to have the humility to know that our way is not the only way, and that we don't always need to get our way. Right? So it seems to me that many of us complain about the injustice of power imbalance, that certain uncles, taunts, abunas, servants, whoever, all get their way. But it also sometimes seems to me like the anger about the alleged situation arises only when you don't like the decision or how it's done. You weren't angry until it contradicted you, right? I'm not saying there isn't a problem. I'm simply saying your perspective on it, right? Is that you weren't mad until it contradicted you of saying, but now that I want my way, I'm critical of who it is that's saying or doing it. Do you always argue for your interpretation or your way? Do you stop and think about whether or not the conduct that you're doing is Christian or not? I mean that literally. Is it Christian? Do you care more about the fruit of the service or whether it was done how you like? Like, imagine if when the Lord told the disciples, he said, okay, make them sit down 50s in a company, sit down in groups of 50. Imagine the apostles started yelling, having a yelling match of whether it's more efficient to put them in a single file of 50 or 2 rows of 25, or sit in a circle because then it's easier to walk around them, right? Or to give the parents to give to the kids, right? But having real fights about that, right? It's like, are we concerned that everybody eats, or that they didn't sit the way that you thought was best, right? What is it that you're fighting for, right? It's for us to ask ourselves that. Are you constantly threatening to quit? If so, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean about what you think of the service and about what you're doing? I won't dwell on it too long. Humility and time. Time isn't yours, right? All that we have is everyone's. So if you think the truth about time, for humility and time, is that it's all for you, you're mistaken. I'm not saying that you don't get time, but I'm saying, but if you view it as, nope, this is all mine, no, it isn't, right? It wasn't created for you and you alone. It was created for the whole people of God. Do you view yourself as exceptional? Do you think the rules shouldn't apply to you? So you get to decide when the rules match and don't. So you'll get so mad when like these people didn't follow the system, and then you don't, and be like, I had to make a decision that was more pastoral. I went with the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law because I saw this need. But you were very worked up about the letter of the law when it was somebody else, right? Like, these are the things that we need to challenge ourselves on. Because if you are doing your own thing, you create division, you cause comparisons, right? Because then the youth are like, but that person doesn't do like that. That person's nice, right? And then you get to be the good guy and let the other person look awful, right? Petty example. Let's say you guys put a rule in the service. You can only go on this trip if you have such and such attendance. And then one servant says, but this poor kid, this is his chance to know God. And he didn't attend, and this is going to be his way to God, right? Great thought, right? So then you decide, yes, they can go. You allow the kid. But there were 4 kids just like him who didn't ask because they were honoring the rules, right? So they didn't even think I should ask because like, no, I know that I shouldn't because I didn't meet this criterion. And now they're scandalized by your behavior because like, oh, it's Kosa, right? And it's because you thought you could loose and bind. And I'm not saying that the answer is never to let them go. That's not the point of the story. But it was saying you assumed and you applied and you took a decision and somebody was hurt by that. 4, in this case, were hurt by that, right? Just because you didn't have the humility to say, I'm not really sure. And there's nothing wrong with going to the person who's responsible and saying, I really feel strongly that I wish this kid could go. That's a great thought. Like, that's a very nice thought, right? I'm just worried that this is going to be a thing. How do we deal with this? Getting the discipleship, right? Of saying, what is a better way? What's a strategy? So that there can be some answer that gives peace. Finally, there's a truth that he commanded us to serve, right? So if you have any other notion than this is to say, God says, but, right? If there's ever a place where God has spoken and it's followed by a however, we have a problem, right? If you're saying, I know the Lord says, but I tell you, something's wrong, right? And yet it's happening all the time. Right? Being like, I know the gospel says turn the other cheek, but in this case you shouldn't, right? Or being like, well, based on what are you saying it shouldn't, right? It's saying, Christ said this, but, and it's like, no, we can fall short of what Christ said, but what do you mean by the however, right? When we say it. So finally, we're supposed to be washing each other's feet. Put ourselves at the lower position, not the higher, right? Christ says that. He says, wash the feet. Stand at the back, be invited to the front. And when you're at the front, don't even believe that you've earned it or that you'll stay there, because the same people who put you in the front might send you to the back, right? Don't even take joy in that. Honor and prestige mean nothing from men, right? That has no meaning, right? And it comes and goes like nothing. Righteousness comes from the right one, the righteous one, which is Christ our King. And we don't look for a reward, we look for right being in our unity. Humility is to seek the truth and not to believe that you are the truth. May the Lord, who is the truth, grant us grace in our service and in our pursuit, that we might have the humility to serve him in truth and spirit. To him be glory, now and always, the age of all ages. Amen.
Thank you, Abuna, for your reflections. I think we have some time for a Q&A, so we'll head over to the Slido and I'll get some of the questions, and if there's anybody that has questions that they would like to ask of Abuna, we can do that. So just give me one moment.
So Abuna, if you tend to talk a lot, what do you do if you're almost afraid to talk with your youth, lest you say something wrong, even if you pray prior?
So if you don't know, don't speak, right? Like have certain guidelines, right? Of being like ask yourself before speaking, why am I speaking? Was I asked to speak? If I was, then at least I have a good, humble why. I'm answering because I was asked. Now, if I'm going to answer, do I actually even know? And if I don't know, then just say I don't know. There's no need even necessarily in most cases to speculate, right? Or if you know that someone else has the answer, then just offer it. But instead be like, why am I speaking? Is it to show off? Is it because I want to show that I know? Is it because I just want to make sure that they heard my opinion? Is it because I don't have peace unless I speak? And then those kind of things, like we said in like talk number 1, those are the kind of things to then go into for guidance, right? Because it's not the end of the world if you have wrongs in you, right? Or just being like, oh, I discovered that, like we're talking in talk 1, that I love to talk. So all I need to learn is, how do I talk rightly? That's all. It's not to say you will now therefore never talk again, right? And it's not to say you will never offer an opinion. It's just saying, how do we modulate it? How do we figure out how to do it in a healthy way with whatever vice that you've got? Because you won't be afraid of saying something if you know it's true and that it's not true because of you, right? That's not going to be scary. And if they've asked for your opinion, then be like, okay, this is my opinion because you asked, right? If they're asking for advice, it's like, am I qualified to give this advice, right? I'm not married. It's not a huge problem for married couples, in most cases for me. But there are some things where I'm like, no, I really don't think I get it. I think you should talk to somebody here who does, right? And there's no shame in that.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go back to the Q&A. How to serve youth who don't seem interested in their class or don't necessarily want to be there and end up distracting others and upsetting servants.
I was told to swallow the mic. I think outreach is a big deal, because outreach is how you're going to get to know them and what's actually going on, and why they are doing, thinking, feeling, behaving the way that they are. If we're treating Sunday school, for example, as just one more place where they have to listen to more stuff, I'm not surprised that they struggle, right? Where it's okay, you're going to go to school this many days a week and then go to church and do it some more. So like, is there a life to it? Is there all of that? Finding that out. I also think we need to get a little bit more creative as servants than what we're doing right now, where I'm just asking, I'm not saying this is the solution, I'm just asking if the way we're doing it is effective anymore. Maybe it's not the right style for this generation. Maybe we need to revisit how we do our Christian education. Maybe it needs to be different than Sunday school. Maybe it needs to be small groups. Maybe it needs to be groups of discipleship. Like, I don't know. I'm just simply saying is try and find out what is the root cause. That's why I think outreach matters. I would hope in servants meetings that an actual service gets discussed, because then you can share your challenges with one another to the particularities of the class. Because what if it's like, oh, it's just one person is going through something and it's just a matter of tolerating the behavior because something's going on, right? Like, where it might not be a huge issue. In another place, it might be that it's more serious than that. So have the servants having discussions as well. But I would say just be careful not to humiliate. Be careful not to overly chastise. I'm not saying don't chastise. I'm saying, like, what is your response? Make sure whatever you do is done in love as we figure it out. But I don't think there's going to be a straight up answer. But I would really say get to know those people is the most important. Once you do, all keys will be given to you, like, with joy.
Okay, thank you, Abuna. Next question. How can I discern when God is calling me to serve in a particular capacity or in a specific service?
I think there would be multiple levels. When you need to question why you believe it's a calling versus just your own inclination. And if it's your own inclination, that doesn't even make it bad, right? Like it's not like that means therefore you shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is, I think we've got to be very careful when we say things like, God has put it on my heart. Like, I'm a little bit weary of that line, even though it's often true. But I'm just saying it's hard to tell what that means and if it's really, really God. And that's where discipleship again comes in, of like with guidance as an outer view. That's one aspect of it. If it's because that's where you're gifted, of course that's more natural where you want to go, right? So if it's because you just naturally are into that, right? Like, I'm not naturally good with seniors, I'm just not, right? I like them, I think they're cute, I can play taula, but I don't know how to do talks. Like, I just wouldn't be me, right? So I wouldn't be like, I've got the seniors, right? If they were asking, it just wouldn't be me. It'd be like, I don't even know anymore what would be me. But I'm just saying is, we each have those. And then I would add to that, just remember that usually, I don't know how things are now, usually we don't choose our service. So I would distinguish between whether you were asked, which one do you want? Then sure, you were asked, therefore by all means answer, right? There's nothing wrong with that. They said, what do you feel comfortable with? And you answered. It's different from when whatever the organization is, like of the system of Sunday school says, you will serve this, then no. If you're creating a new one, then just go to the people in charge and saying, hey, I wanted to consider doing 1, 2, 3. How can I go about it? So get advice, follow the system. Those are the two places where the humility will protect you, right? Where regardless of what you think of the system, it doesn't matter. It protects us from just being self-willed all the time. And then find a way to use your gifts no matter where you get assigned. So if you don't get your way, still use your gifts and you'll find yourself finding the joy in it still, I think.
Thank you for that. How can I approach a service partner who is less helpful than I expected without being judgmental and while showing humility?
By having no expectations, right? You're not responsible for other servants' honesty. If you're delegated that, then by all means. Instead, imagine if you were at work and somebody was laid off, right? You would have to figure out what is asked of you and find out, can I do that, yes or no? It's not, can I do that relative to whether so-and-so does. It's, can I do that, yes or no, period. It's not relative to others. So if you have the capacity, great. If you don't, then by all means go, again, back to the system and say, we need more servants, right? Why? You have this many servants. These things are not getting done. Not because that one's not even a real servant, right? And this person, blah, 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 of just being like, it seems to be that in spite of the number, that there isn't enough outreach, or it seems to me that in spite of it, we don't have enough people giving lessons, right? And make, like, where it's like there's an objective fact not attached to a person, right? But not to, because once you start assessing the other person, of course you're going to get worked up and you're going to be judging, right? And you have no idea who thinks the same of you, right? Like, you've just made it relative to that person. Another person can be like, well, you suck. So it's not about who's good or bad. It's what am I supposed to do? Am I able to do it? What's in my hands? And if you can't, no problem. That's its own issue. But your can't has nothing to do with person Y. It has only to do with your ability of what you can handle and not handle. And no problem about that. Just don't judge while you're doing it.
Okay, thank you, Abuna. Next question. What are the practical ways that we can befriend our kids at Sunday school? I guess it's due to the age gap and current generation versus...
Be authentic. Be authentic. Like, I think authenticity, like, crosses all cultural age boundaries, right? Like, I don't know all the Egyptian humor. I was serving in a church that, like, was all Arabic in the Midwest, and I had a blast. And I was so petrified when I went, because I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna fit in, right? And so I'm just like, I was like, whatever, this is what I know. I made my crappy Arabic funny. Like, I'm just like, go ahead, laugh. I'm like, this must be what it feels like for a newcomer. Like, it actually even made me relate, right? So I had the time of my life. Like, I was actually sad to leave. Like, and they had a good time. Like, just be authentic, right? What is the message of God, like, that I'm delivering, and how can I be Christ to these people through my own personality? And if it's a real barrier, then you might need to request more servants that match more, but it doesn't mean you need to go. It doesn't necessarily mean that at all. And that's, again, I keep on emphasizing outreach. Get to know them. Get to know them, and those barriers will become less, regardless of what you think is the obstacle.
Okay, thank you, Abuna. I sometimes struggle to connect with my father of confession and don't want to be burdensome on him. What can we do to build a better relationship?
It depends. Because I hate talking about this because I'm aware that there's such a need for guidance, and it's really hard to access. So I'm saying things that I know that are in theory to be true that are not always practically available. So I'm prefacing saying I know that. So I'm speaking ideally versus what's accessible, because I don't know the situation here. So I'm not taking any jab in any way. One is to say, all right, is my father confession the one who I'm also getting guidance from, yes or no? Because if yes, then you don't need to worry about being a burden. Just say, this is what I'm looking for, can I? Because you're not looking for something bad. You're looking for what you should be getting, like that's not wrong. So the person says, no, my capacity is X, then no problem. Then it becomes, given that this person only has capacity X, what can I do? Am I going to get mentorship in the service from somebody who I just trust in the service? Am I going to outsource just this one thing? Maybe there's one person I can always just talk to about this. Is to get creative with that, because what you're seeking is a good thing, right? So the solution is not to just not do it. It's to fight for it until you can find it, and it's messy. Like, I'm learning that, and I've been way more at fault than I'd like to admit. But don't be afraid to ask for it, because that's the only way you're going to arrive at it. I was saying, what I'm trying to get is this. Go in prepared. Be like, I have these questions about this. If they say this is not the place for it, then say, then where is? Because this is for growth. This is for insert whatever it is. And if it turns out that you just really like this person, but they're not a good match for you with their, where they are in life and where you are in life, with no judgment, but just saying that this isn't working, no problem, right? Like in that booklet about confession, like, if I were to be like, oh, I'm going to disciple myself to so-and-so because, like, everyone, like, this is the guru of this, and their availability is 20 minutes every 6 months, am I a disciple just a name, right? Like, then go to the non-celebrity, right? And go to the person where you can actually get access.
So we have time for one more question. Anybody has any questions, we're happy to take them from the floor. Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask was, because I remember the story with Embarowais that when he said if you don't have food with you that's fasting, then you can eat the non-fasting food, but it was, if you go to someone's house and then they don't have fasting food, you can eat it, but you don't overindulge it. So I was just wondering, what if you had food before the fast started and you can't, should you eat it or do you just get rid of it?
Question. I'm gonna give the universal. It depends. And that's where I get guidance. For example, let's say you love food so much that you made sure there was leftovers, right? Like where that was not an accident, right? Then in that person's case where there's a strong sense of gluttony, it might be like, no, you're gonna throw it out, and that was wrong. So if they're like, oh, but what a waste. I'm like, yes, you created it. It's not because I created it, you did, right? In another person's case, people are actually feel like it just happened, right? And they feel very, very, very strongly about not wasting, which is a beautiful thing that they care about that. And in some cases, yes, it could be appropriate to say, you know what, finish it off, but again, don't overindulge. Like there's different ways, depending on what the person is struggling with. Both answers could be conceivable, I guess, to it. Good question.
So what I'll be doing is I'll be reading out the questions for our fathers, and then I'll be answering them one by one. So again, feel free to connect to the Slido with the QR code that is there. So I'll start, and whoever obviously wants to answer, feel free. Our first question is, fathers, are we ready? Yes. Yes, okay, great, thank you. So our first question is, how can I remain humble while also investing in the gifts that God has given me?
How can we be humble and what?
How can I remain humble while also investing in the gifts?
Because the definition of a gift is that it's not from you. So if you think that you're the one who came up with it, then you'll lose your humility. But if you understand that there's nothing that you have that you didn't receive, which is what St. Paul says when he talks about gifts and tells people to use them, right, is saying that what do you have that you didn't receive? The definition of a gift is that you received it. So you'll realize that pride is kind of dumb with those things. Like it's like when little kids show off that their house is big, when it's like, but you didn't build it, you didn't buy it, like your parents did. So if you have that mentality that I didn't do it, I'm not the source of this gift, and that God gave it to me to be used for his kids, right? Then the focus becomes on the other rather than the self, and you'll maintain the humility.
Okay, thank you, Abuna. Next question. It says, in John 14, what does it mean when Christ says, I am going to the Father, for my Father is greater than I? What does greater than I mean?
I'm sure you would like to answer this question.
So first you have to understand who is the Son of Man. Who is the Son of Man? Jesus. The right answer every time, right? Jesus. All right. Who is Jesus Christ? This is very important because a lot of the questions that come from people who don't have the right orthodox belief in who Jesus is, a lot of these questions and similar ones are going to come out. You're like, how does Jesus pray to the Father? Isn't he God's? So all of the series of questions will follow. So who is Jesus Christ? He is God incarnate. He is the Logos of God incarnate, right? So what did he do? St. Paul tells us that he emptied himself. He emptied himself and took the form of a slave or a bondservant, or he took a form that is much lower than who he is in essence. So the Lord Jesus Christ is speaking that as the Son of Man is here on earth in the economy of salvation, in God's way of saving us. He emptied himself, right? Even though in essence he is glorified, of course, as God, but yet he emptied himself. He took the form of a slave. He was spit on. He was beaten. He was crucified. He who is life allowed himself to die. So in the economy of salvation, he is saying he is less than the Father, only in the economy of salvation, not in essence, but in the way that he came in the form of a slave and was humiliated. Just the incarnation itself is a humble act of God. So that's what this means in John chapter 14. That and then he sat at the right hand of the Father. Well, he's always been with the Father, but in the human form, or in his incarnate, in the economy of salvation as an incarnate logos, when he ascended into heaven, he sat at the power of the Father, even though he never left the Father, but he is one with him in essence. And also, in his first coming, he came in humility. They could not even find a place for him to be born. He who created all places did not find a place for himself to be born. But in his second coming, he's going to come in his glory. So this has to do with the manifestation of God's glory, and the fact that he emptied himself, as you all know. There is this term called kenosis, means he emptied himself for our salvation, for us and for our salvation. He has done that, and that's why he speaks of the Father in that sense as greater than him, but not in essence. And if my father would like to.
Thank you so much. So our next question is, how can I train myself to get rid of the spirit of comparison? How did the other 9 disciples not become resentful of Peter, James, and John? If there are any floor questions, we're happy to circulate the mic as well around the room. Thank you.
This is the best question for Abuna George.
About comparisons, right? Okay. So the reason we compare a lot, especially this day and age, 90% of the reason is social media, right? Social media. Because we're not equipped to handle all this information, what everybody's doing, where everybody's checking in, what they're having for dinner, what restaurant, what airport, who cares? But the reason we're facing this challenge, especially in this generation, is because of that. You think like 40, 50 years ago, maybe not that far, but we never knew what everybody was doing, right? So we couldn't compare. We don't know what my neighbor is doing, let alone people across the globe. So why am I saying this? Because this is the reason. So if you can eliminate that reason, ideally, I know it's harder said than done, but at least when you identify what triggers me to compare, now you can either try to eliminate or control or limit, whatever it might be. But this is one of the major reasons in this day and age why we do that, because we're always looking at what others are doing and thinking their lives are better, because nobody posts a picture of themselves when they first wake up in the morning. No, they get dressed up and they post pictures of themselves when they're at their best. And we think this is their everyday look, or they're always on vacation, or they're always buying things. No, they could be in debt and buying things, but just showing off that they bought something. You don't know what's happening. But we only see at their best, and we compare to that. Having said that, we're all sort of, you can picture it as if we're all in a race, but not against each other. We're not against each other. When St. Paul says, I have finished the race, we all have a lane that we're running in or walking in, whatever speed, and we can't cross over to the other person's lane. We have to keep our eye on the prize. I have finished the race, his race, not my race. I can't be St. Paul. I can't be St. Anthony. There's only one of each one of us. We're individualized. People that lose the race, sprinters, when they start looking around, right? They take their eyes off the finish line and they start looking to their right and to their left to compare who's going faster, and they lose focus and they end up not finishing on time or not finishing at all. But we are encouraged to keep our eyes on the prize, keep our eyes on the finish line, and not to worry. We're not a race against each other. I'm in a race against myself, not against anybody else. What does that mean, against myself? I have to live up to my potential. Like Abuna Anthony was saying, we're all gifted with something that's been given to us, not that we deserve it or not that we worked hard for it. No, the Spirit gives according to what the Spirit wants. I don't have a talent because I worked hard, I'm intelligent, I'm whatever it might be. No, it's not up to me. It's the Spirit who gives for the glory of God. So the race is against myself, against my potential. Am I living up to my potential or not? Am I investing in the talents that I have been given or not? Not that am I investing in the talents that someone else is given. In the parable of the talents, when the master gave 10, 5, and 1, he never compared to each other. He compared to the person's potential. I gave you 5, give me back 5. I gave you 10, give me back 10. He never said to the one who had 5, how come you didn't try to get 10 like your brother? He never said that. He said, what I gave you, you invested and returned back. And the one that didn't invest it, he called him, you're wicked and lazy. Wicked and lazy. Instead of good and faithful. So what do we have to do? We have to be good and faithful in the talents that we have been given.
Are there any questions from the floor that we'd like to take live? Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I have a question it's kind of adjacent to what you're saying, Abuna, but I may butcher it, so I hope you understand the essence of what I'm saying. I feel like lately I've been meeting a lot of people who have been inquiring into the Orthodox Church, whether Coptic or whether Eastern, and it seems like so many people are coming to realize that there's a beautiful faith in our church, and a lot of their first exposure to that faith has been through social media. And I used to kind of feel iffy about online ministry, whatever that means or whatever that looks like. But then I'm finding that was the only way that those people ended up finding the church. And so I've been kind of at a personal crossroad, and I don't know if anyone else is at this crossroad where it's wanting to share things about the faith and things about the love of Orthodoxy, the love of God in a forum where other people can experience it in a digital age, but then also feeling I don't want to be online, I don't want to expose myself to things that aren't beneficial. And I think that there's two really not warring, but opposite schools of thought on this, but I never really hear a reflection on the benefits or the considerations to both. So I don't know if any of you have thoughts on that.
Question. So we're blessed today, as we all know, with many digital resources now, such as Upper Room Media and some of the channels that we've been blessed with within our church and other dioceses as well. So we can certainly share, and maybe you have already shared those resources with each other. And God uses those means to be able to reach the hearts of many around the world, and as you alluded to. So we can share those blessed resources that we have, even if perhaps we may not be subscribed to those resources, but at least if we're aware of them and we can benefit from them, we can also share them with those around us, and they can benefit from them as well. Unless we miss the point of your question, my dear, and does that help?
I think things like Upper Room Media, where there's not really it's not really a personal platform, it's kind of a place where you post something, probably has its own place in this online universe. But I mean more in terms of ministries that are purely communicating to someone on the other side of the screen, like a priest with an Instagram account that is sharing reflections as a priest, or even maybe it's not a priest, maybe it's a deacon, maybe it's servants from a church. And I think that there are a lot of priests even from the Eastern Orthodox Church that have YouTube channels that are educating people online. And sometimes I hear priests saying, this is not the way you live Orthodoxy, you live Orthodoxy presently in the church. And if you become very like enraptured in an online like ethos. Like that's not the real church, and you're gonna get confused when you actually show up to a church and there's like giddos, like, and there's like actual like real people, but then also that was someone's gateway to understanding. And so I was just reminded when Abuna George was talking about comparison, like maybe there is that online comparison where like you're getting one view of the church, but then when you come into the physical church, there's not people ready to receive them. There's not like, maybe there's like a difference between what's online and what's in person. So I've just been trying to figure out how beneficial is it, because it's kind of new. That's kind of my question. I don't know if that's too complicated, or we can circle back to it later. But
No, I'm just going to highlight what I said, so it's not taken out of context. So in the context, what I was saying, if you're struggling with comparison, know that one of the triggers for us is social media. Doesn't mean all social media is bad. Doesn't mean all the tools that we've been given are bad. But the question was about comparison. And I said most of the time we compare because of social media. So if you are struggling with comparisons and this is keeping you down and depressed and feeling inadequate, then identify that this is probably one of the triggers. Doesn't mean that all social media is bad. Like you said, no, sometimes it's used as a tool for evangelizing. Yeah, it's a great gateway. I don't think it's the way to become purely Orthodox, but maybe it's a way to draw people into Orthodoxy. And then we always tell them, come and see, right? Like Christ said, come and see. And the disciples said, come and see. So come to the church and see, not just be given, a link to something and let's say just go live your Orthodoxy. But in the context of comparisons and feeling of inadequacy and how come I'm not like this person, know that the trigger is most likely the use of social media a lot. But doesn't mean that all social media is bad. No, it has its benefits as well.
Any other questions from the floor?
Sorry, this is a little bit more of a theological question. I was going to ask, how is predestination not real? If God knows that someone will end up in hell, wouldn't he want that individual to be with him? And so why not just create people that will go to heaven without impeding on their free will?
Of course, I will look to my beloved fathers to correct my weakness if needed. But as we know, our Lord created us with free will. Otherwise, that would not be love if we did not have the free will to love Him from all our heart and all our soul, all of our strength. And it's His desire that nobody perish, but that all have. Oh, sorry. And as we know, it's His desire that no one perish, but that all have everlasting life. And His desire, as we know, is that all not perish, but that have everlasting life. And so if God had created us with the concept of predestination, then that means that at some point somebody's free will is impeded. And so He, of course, in His love, and we're created in His image and likeness, and He is a God of free will. We also have that gift of free will, and it's up to us, of course, to cooperate with His grace so that we can approach that gift of eternal life with Him. Otherwise, anything else would mean my free will has been impeded upon. Just like our beloved fathers and mothers, when they bring us into this world by God's grace, of course they desire that we honor God and that we follow in His pathway and that we allow our parents to be able to shepherd us towards the kingdom of heaven. But of course they can't force us. And at times we may go astray, but by God's grace we find our way once again. But if they were to force us to live a certain way, and we felt that we feared them, then that would not be love. That relationship with them would not be one of love, and that wouldn't be the relationship that they desire from us, one of love. But predestination assumes that again, somebody's free will is being impeded, and that's not who God is for us. And he brought us into this world desiring that we have a relationship with him, a relationship of love, but the prerequisite is that we are created with free will, which is the case because we are in his image and likeness. Unless I missed the point of your question, my dear.
Okay, thank you, Abuna. We'll just do one question from here, and then we'll do another one after. Okay. So, how do we overcome laziness in spiritual life and learn to be disciplined and consistent in prayer, spiritual readings, and Bible readings?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people ask this question, but there is, at the end of the day, regardless of what is causing you to ask it, there's the unavoidable that at one point you have to do something. The thing is, like, 'cause we can throw tips, right? But at the end of the day, like, almost all of us, when we ask this, myself included, are saying, like, how do I get myself to pray every day? And it's like, at one point, you just have to do it. So, like, there can be tips, like, that we do, like, make it regular, attach it to a regular time, right? It can be like, here's how to deal with this situation, or whatever it is. But at some point, you do have to actually make a decision, right? Because the whole thing with free will is that you actually have a will, right? And so what you choose to do is showing what you value, right? So you don't think much about the fact that you need to eat every day, whether you ate tons or ate little, but you don't think about it. You just do it, right? You don't be like, oh, how can I bring myself every day to eat? Right? How can I bring myself every day to do all the normal things that you do? No one thinks about that, right? So I would say go get the tips, like, and there could be many, and to get them specialized to you, but there's still that practice of doing it, right? That's exactly what the battle is. The battle is not about the failure or the success, right? The battle part of it, like, those have their own nouns: victory, right? Success, failure. Those are the conclusions. Right? But the battle is actually the process itself, right? And so that's where you have to initiate actually using your will. So do you struggle, right? So for example, if you use a tip of saying, okay, I'm going to set an alarm on my phone to do X, right? In that moment that you set the alarm, so you've done the tip, you did this cool whatever, right? In that moment, do you say, I now have an option to do it or not do it? That's where the battle of your will takes place. Right, is in that moment where you have consciousness to say, I could actively choose one way or the other. So what I would say is pay attention to that. That's the actual issue, right? Because then you can work accordingly, or just say, that's one aspect. Another aspect, other than the tips, what do I know about it, right? Is that if I have enough knowledge to say, oh wait, I need this thing. Maybe I didn't know that I needed it. Right? That might be what I need for my mind to accept that it needs to battle. So you can deal with the secondary stuff that's making you not battle. But the main thing to realize is I still have to battle, right? Even the best saint, St. Anthony, when he went off to the desert, he got bored, right? And he's like, Lord, what do I do? There was a doing, right? And so it was like, what do I do? And then he had the revelation of do this, 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 and you'll be saved. So he just did it, right? So it's about training your will. And so I would say go to your spiritual father saying, my will is very weak in X, Y, and Z. How do I exercise that muscle, right? And then exercise the muscle, right? That's the main thing of doing the work. We talk about the philosophy of it a lot, but we don't always do the actual stuff.
Okay, great. We'll do one more question from the audience, and then the rest we'll do Slido. I think just for the sake of all the questions that we've received.
So my question is a follow-up, Abuna, to your predestination answer. Like from what I was asking is, or the question I mean was, like how can, with Christ having the foreknowledge of what's going to happen in the future, knowing that who's going to go to heaven and who's going to go to hell, not just create the individuals who will end up in heaven because he loves us without impeding on our free will. And then like my thought process to that is like Christ had the destination of coming on earth to die for our sins. And if Judas didn't betray him, then there would be no Christ on the cross, and there would be no salvation. And like if everything didn't play its course, there would be no salvation, and therefore there is a destination, from what I'm thinking at least, to like events had to take place in order for us to receive salvation. I don't know if that was, if I worded it weirdly.
Thank you for that thought. It's helpful in my weak self to remember that our Lord Christ entered into our human condition. He recognized that we had inherited the fallen nature. I was just asking our beloved Father Bunabisho earlier today about the concept of original sin and the consequence of original sin. So we inherited the spiritual poverty, as my beloved Father taught my weak self. And so he entered into this condition, our state, so that he could restore us and renew us. So of course he knew that our forefather and foremother Adam and Eve would have fallen from grace. And so through that period, he entered into our human condition to restore us. So he recognizes the path that we are taking, but that doesn't stop him from still providing humanity that opportunity to be able to come to know him. And because of his great love for us, he knows that we will make mistakes, and yet he still enters into our condition to grant us the opportunity to make that decision whether or not to accept him or not. And so in that case, if he had just created those of us who are going to enter into paradise with him, what does that say about his love for all, to grant everybody an opportunity, even a chance to be able to get to know him and to make that decision for themselves here on earth? And two things could be right at the same time. And so even though he enters into our human condition, he still grants us that chance to come to know him and for us to cooperate with his grace. And now it's up to us to decide whether or not I will cooperate with this grace that he has granted me. And yes, we will make mistakes along the way and we will fall, but he's opened the pathway for us to come to him through the life of repentance and to be restored. And again, his desire is that no one perish, but that all have everlasting life, which means that we all have the opportunity to accept him. Even if he knows the pathway I will take, he's still granting my weakness the chance to live and experience him because of his love. All that he does is out of his love for us, including bringing those of us who may choose not to live with him, but still out of his desire for us to come to know him, he grants us that opportunity while on earth to be able to live a life with him.
Thank you for that. I feel like I have... Oh.
Malish, I'm sorry. Based on what Abuna is saying, I think Abuna is answering what I see maybe a disconnect. If you take, for example, time as being this horizontal plane, okay? Time is created, right? So we're in a dimension, like we have this dimension called time. God is outside of it, right? So in the incarnation, he entered it, right? Like he's entering that plane, but he's outside of it. Because he's outside of it, he can see it almost linearly in the way that we cannot, right? So seeing something is not the same as causing the something, right? So foreknowledge is not the same as predestination. So saying that I know that something is going to happen is not saying that I did that, right? So if I know someone really well and I'm like, oh, watch this, and when I say this to that guy, he's going to do this. I didn't make it happen. I just know it, right? So knowing it is one thing. That's part A. Part B is that prophecy is different from necessity, right? So there's prophecies that he would betray. Christ didn't need a betrayer. It was just prophesied because of this whole concept trying to tell us that this really is God, or saying, let me do something you can't do. I'll tell you what will happen before it happens because I know that it will happen, right? That's why it wasn't the prophet's own words that did it. It's always the prophet inspired by God to be able to say it. So saying that because Judas would betray is why the prophet said, there's a guy who will betray. It's not like Judas's betrayal is what salvation was dependent upon. It was simply saying, this is going to happen, therefore I'm saying it. And if it didn't, he'd be a false prophet, right? Because the whole point was that he's saying, here's this thing that I know is going to happen. He didn't saying, we're going to make this happen. God didn't say, I'm going to set it up so that there's a guy who betrays me, right? And that way I can save you, right? He's like, no, I'm going to take on flesh, I'm going to die for you. And in fact, what you will do to me is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I'm pre-telling you so that when it happens, this is what Christ often said with any prophecies. Like, I'm telling you this so that when it comes to pass, you may believe, right? So by telling this is that we would be able to look at me like, oh, that's what they were talking about. But it's not the same as doing it.
Una, the question is saying why a loving God would create somebody whom he knows will perish. The question isn't about whether the foreknowledge, because I think that's what you might be struggling with. The idea of God knowing but not doing, he gets it. It says, why would a loving God create people he knows are going to perish? I clarified the question. صح كده مينا? Yeah? يلا.
It's your turn. And now Abu Bishoy will tell you.
I think time's up, right? Do we have to go? Let's say he did that. Let's say, hypothetically, we live in a utopia and everybody is good. Everybody is good. Would you think that we have free will, really? If everybody's good and nobody does anything bad, at the end of the day you'll say, how come everybody is good? How come nobody's doing anything bad? And then it'll make you question the nature of God. He's not really fair. He only created good people in this world. So it's like, either way, you'll say blame God. So imagine everybody is in the world comes to church and good, all living a saintly life, and not even if they make a mistake right away, they repent and no evil, nothing is bad. It's a utopia, right? You'll question the same thing. You'll say, do we really have free will? Did God really give us free will? If He did, how come we're all good? How come we're all going to heaven? Right? You'll question God. Maybe God is not really, maybe I'm not really choosing to love God. Maybe I'm forced. Maybe I'm hardwired to only choose to do good. You understand? So it's not God's nature to only create people who will love Him back. Because at the end of the day, you'll still say, that's not fair. Where is the loving God? What does it mean to be a loving God? If He's creating everybody, and we only have the choice to choose Him, is that really free will? Can God really force us to choose freely to love Him? That's not free will then. Does that make sense?
Like, He doesn't have to impede on our free will. Like, if you go to, I'm assuming, a monastery and you see everyone that's saintly, you're like, oh, Christ forced them to become loving to Him? Like, wouldn't everyone around you, out of their free will, love Christ and then end up with Him? Like, what? So, from what I understand from what you're saying is, there has to be people that go to hell in order for in order for us to have free will.
No, free will means we can choose to do good or do bad. So by probability alone, some people might choose to do bad, right? To live away from God. But if everybody in the monastery, like you're taking a microcosmic here, but globally, if everybody in the world that you've ever met is only doing good, it'll make you wonder, where's the free will? Free will means I have the choice to make good or bad, right or left, right or left, correct, I mean. But if everybody's going the one direction, one path, and no other, at the end of the day, you'll say, we're not really free. We're all going in, nobody ever thought of going the other direction, and then it'll hit you that, oh, we're all forced, or that God only created people who will end up going to heaven. He wants everybody to be saved. He wants. But my will sometimes impedes what God wants. He said, how many times did I want to gather your children, but you didn't want? So He's respecting what I want. Make sense? I hope.
Okay, I think for the sake of time, just because we have less than 10 minutes left, we'll move on. So.
I feel like I have to appear perfect for my youth despite struggling in my life. I'm afraid of looking vulnerable since I'm supposed to be a role model. Advice.
You repeat the question, please. This is coming from a servant,
This is
assuming,
coming
right?
from a servant. So,
right?
so I'll repeat it again. It
Yeah.
says, I feel like I have to appear perfect for my youth despite struggling in my life. I'm afraid of looking vulnerable since I'm supposed to be a role model.
Right.
Advice.
It's a good sense of responsibility from the person who sent that question. One, I sense that the person is obviously struggling. And to struggle, I remember Buna Georgios, I always say this because his word in one of the servants' meeting really touched our hearts. He said, tell the youth, and I say tell the servants, if you are struggling, that means you're alive. A lot of people, I think it was John Climacus who said, there are those who will struggle to reach the virtue, and they will reach the virtue, and for that they will be crowned. And there are those who will struggle to reach the virtue, but will not reach the virtue, and they will be crowned for their struggle. So the fact that you're struggling means you're not happy with what's going on in your life. And therefore continue to struggle, and struggle harder, but struggle with the grace of God. Struggle in your prayer, struggle with tears, because as you know, our tears, they overcome God, as the Bible tells us in the Song of Songs, turn away your eyes or your face from me because your eyes have overcome me. So struggle. But that doesn't mean that, now out of honesty, I have to tell my children and of the sins that I'm falling into, so I am honest, yes, and you will cause them to stumble. And if you do that, then you have two now sins. You have your own that you're struggling, and now you've made someone stumble. No, your private life is your private life between you and God. That doesn't mean, of course, you understand, we're not talking about hypocrisy here. We're talking about what is proper self-disclosure and what is not, right? So you cannot come to someone and say, you're struggling with adultery, me too. You're not strengthening anyone by saying that, right? So you continue to struggle. You could maybe the fact, actually not maybe, because of the fact that you are serving, your struggle will be more. You're going to struggle more. And God has put you in service for your own salvation. So this is a good thing for you, and eventually that struggle of how can I serve and yet still fall into these sins and temptations, as you continue to fight the spiritual warfare, God will purify you. This is amazing. This is amazing. My concern is sometimes not how do I continue to serve the youth, or my concern sometimes is how do I, what would people think of me? That is a bigger concern. We're all sinners. We're all sinners, and we are all in need of the grace of God. And the more you believe that, the more you understand that, the more your struggle will be genuine, authentic. And this is what God is looking for, authentic servants. But yes, definitely do not disclose this to your youth, but definitely to your father of confession, and continue to struggle, and God will give you the grace to overcome.
Thank you, Buna. I think just for the sake of time, because we have 4 minutes left, this will be our last question. Forgive us for not being able to answer all the questions. So this question is, how do I deal with burnout in service? Maybe very relevant to our fathers who may be able to answer this question well. Should I ask them? No.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's helpful to meet with our spiritual father or our father of confession, just to review the services of which we are a part and why we feel that burnout. Because at times it may not be because of the service itself, but perhaps because of other aspects in my life that are maybe spilling over into my service. at the end of the day, we come to we are blessed to join and serve because we are the ones who need the service for our sakes as well. So it is a source of blessing for us, but it may help to ask ourselves, why do I feel the burnout? Is it necessarily because of the service and I'm feeling I'm stretched thin because of all the different services? Or is it because there's something else happening in my life that is spilling over and maybe burdening me? Because the service shouldn't feel like a burden at the end, of course. It should feel like I am coming to be served. I'm coming to see my Lord Christ in my brothers and sisters. I'm coming to receive the renewal that I'm looking for. Every time I'm preparing for service, I am the one who's learning for my sake first and foremost. So that may help to first revisit my life and inventory what's going on in my life and what may be the root cause of me feeling this way. And then perhaps then we can meet with our spiritual father to receive his thoughts as well, unless my beloved fathers had any.
It is easier to prevent burnout than to treat it. Okay? So if you're listening to this, make sure amongst the things you discuss with your father of confession is proper self-care. The word self-care doesn't sit too well with many people because they equate it with selfishness. That's not the case. If you are to care for yourself as God cares for you, you are to love your neighbor as you love yourself, you must have some level of self-care. So amongst the things that you can discuss with your father of confession or your spiritual guide is how is it that you care for your spiritual life. I remember Pope Shenouda telling us as newly ordained fathers, he said, Abunas, make sure you have a day during the week for yourself. A day where you can actually sit in meditation and in prayer, and a day that is not for others. You know, coming from the Pope of the Church. The Pope himself, who used to spend 2 to 3 days per week in solitude. That's a form of self-care. Okay? Self-care is not the spa you go to or the massage you order. Self-care is the time you spend to replenish. I was reading last night a beautiful passage on the Samaritan woman, and I hope I remember it correctly. It says like this, not every fountain is a well, but every well is a fountain. Okay, so we may be fountains, have something to give, but we're not a well. We're not deep enough. And it says that the well that the Samaritan woman drank, was at with Christ is about 105 feet deep. But it later on became 75 feet deep because of the garbage that people kept throwing in it, and it dried up. So I reflected, isn't that what our life sometimes looks like as servants? We have something to give, especially when we go out of prepared to serve, and we have a lot to give, and some of us are reading to the fathers and we think we know something, right? And we're giving and we're amazing, right? And then after a while, we have nothing. We're empty because we stopped being a well. We're not receiving, and when we are receiving, we're receiving drops. We listen to many sermons, and has the sermons turned into a changed life? Or have we still the same habit? We come to service, we come to spiritual days, but how has our outreach changed? How has our prayer changed? How has our attitude in service changed? Even easier than this, how has our attendance to servants' meetings changed? One of the things that you can tell bothers me a lot is how we have 100 servants, and out of 100 servants, only 20 come. Where are the other 80s? Huh? So it's so important that you take care of yourself spiritually so that you have something to give to others. Otherwise, we will dry up. And this is not for you, this is for me. I'm saying this is the reflection that I had last night reading about the Samaritan woman. Okay? So prevention is better than treatment. Make sure you prevent burnout.
Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you so much to our fathers for the words and the guidance.